the normal world, we have the almighty food chain. Birds eat bugs, lions eat antelope, crocodiles eat everything, and people eat apple pie. But what happens when you give that apple pie the power to fight back? Well, you get Appletun, which fights back against Lechonk as per the pokedex. It explicitly states that when some Lechonk come along to lick the sweet nectar on Appletun's back, Appletun will spew sticky nectar at them to drive them away. So that begs the question to be asked. What is the entire Pokemon food chain? I'm Curlic, and I'm here to answer this question. And when I say the entire Pokemon food chain, I mean it. I have gone through every single Pokedex entry in order to create this analysis for you. And I definitely lost some sanity doing so. Now, I did put in a limitation, and that is that it has to explicitly state in the Pokemon games' Pokedex what the Pokemon eats. Otherwise, this could get really messy. So, there are a few exceptions to this, and I made some judgment calls for any that are not directly stated based on additional info from the games or real life. I have a document that I organized with every single Pokemon on it that I will release in my Discord. I recommend joining that. You'll meet a lot of people that are like-minded. So you can scour all the specific details that I might not directly quote here, and you get to see my insanity in real time. In addition, if it is not stated what they eat, then it will be assumed that they eat the same as their previous forms for their evolutions. If it is not stated whatsoever, then I may assume, based on the animal or concept that they are based on, or state that they do not eat. These are judgment calls that I made based on what science I know and whatever additional information, again, I could get. They could be argued, and I do have some of those argued concepts as a part of this. Again, my reasoning behind these decisions is that if we went by the game mechanics or the anime, everything would just be a berry-eating herbivore or omnivore, and I want this to be as realistically applicable to real life as possible. That's what makes this entertaining and interesting to me, let alone hopefully provides you a niche that you don't see anywhere else. Now, if I don't mention their Mega or Gigantamax form, it could be assumed that they don't eat or they don't eat anything inherently different from their regular forms, as it's just a temporary form. Legendary Pokemon are also going to be outside of the food chain on their own level. Reason being is that while many don't have a noted diet, and we can treat them like an invasive species. Think of it like the Emerald Ash Borer, the European Gypsy Moth, the Japanese Hornet. When they are in a new land, they exist outside of the food chain. Nothing hunts it, and so it is essentially free to hunt as it pleases without natural competition. So, long story short, for the sake of this video, Legendaries, Mythicals, Ultra Beasts, and Paradox Pokemon are considered an invasive species. For any terms that I use in the video, such as Detrivore or Autotroph, I will explain them as we go along as to not waste any more time here. Lastly, this will be organized by bottom of the food period to the top with timestamps, while noting any specific Pokemon that directly eat others as we go along. If I had made a full food web, it would be a visual nightmare. And yes, to answer your last question, we are part of the food chain. So without further ado, we're going to start at the bottom with our Detrivores. Detrivores are animals that feed on dead organic material, especially plant detritus, and detritus is, kind of using the word inside the word, pretty much whatever waste, whatever is breaking down, your leaf piles, what do worms eat, maggots, and so on. And, well, that's all part of the food chain, and it all starts here. I also want to note, don't put too much weight into the chart of anything as we go along. When it comes to creating these types of charts in real life, sometimes you have to just put them into a grouping of what they are, because when animals kind of hit their push point, they will typically end up eating other animals, or if they find another animal that they typically couldn't eat, they might eat it if they can or have to, so on and so forth. There will be specific ones, again, that are above or below others, and I will draw attention to those. So speaking of ones that I do want to draw attention to right away, the very bottom of the food chain is not Magikarp. No sir, no ma'am, no non-binary pal. It is Wimpod. It specifically states in the Pokedex, it will pick up anything it finds on the ground. Sometimes it finds coins, so Murkrow and Meowth will go after it. In addition, it's nature's cleaner. It eats anything and everything, including garbage and rotten things. The ground near its nest is always clean. So as such, we have the bottom of our food period. It is here. It literally says it's nature's cleaner. Think like a catfish. Think like, I don't know, again, worms, maggots, all that good. Well, I don't want to say good stuff. I don't like maggots, but I think you get the idea. I think you get the idea here. So right at the bottom, we have Wimpod. Now, I will say the rest of these, I might not say in particular order and according to the actual chart that you're going to see in front of you, but at least everything will be explained, all 1,025 of them. So the one I want to draw additional attention to is technically the one that I did put towards the top of this Detrivore area, which is Dratini. I did actually organize these in Pokedex order for the most part, so you can follow along by Pokedex order, with some exceptions just because I had to make some adjustments as I was double checking all of my work. So Dratini, it's still weak, so it lurks on the floor of bodies of water, eating whatever food sinks down and living a quiet life. As such, Dratini can be considered a Detrivore. It doesn't combat things. It is waiting for stuff to drop down. That could be Pokemon. That could be general food. That could be whatever algae might fall down. So Dratini's a Detrivore. To follow up, we do have Shroomish. The Pokedex does state that it loves to eat damp, composted soils in forests. If you enter a forest after a long rain, you can see many Shroomish feasting on composted soil. So, again, very direct statement. It's eating decaying or composted soil, which has decaying like fruits, nuts, grasses, so on and so forth. The next few shouldn't surprise you too much, I hope, that I'm going to talk about, with one of them being an exception. And if you're wondering, oh, where's its evolution? Where are the evolutions? Well, the evolutions might be higher on the food chain, so we'll talk about them when we get to those parts of the food chain. I want to keep things in natural order. So, Trubbish. Unsanitary places are what they like best. They can be spotted in Alola, often with Grimer in hot pursuit. So we know that Grimer does eat Trubbish. It gorges on trash until its stomach is full, then it belches toxic gas. An unlucky whiff of gas will put a person in the hospital. So it's not trying to do this to us on purpose, so we are not prey to them, but we are subjected to whatever they do, and it could hurt us. So they are not higher on the food chain than humans. It's just something to note, as there will be Pokemon that we encounter in the future while we're talking about their entries that fight other Pokemon but don't necessarily eat them. Poisonous gas leaks out of it when it breeds. Muck that catch a whiff of that stench will come drooling. Makes sense that Muck would also chase after it, so also higher on the food chain. Also, we can see that Galarian Wheezing also like the fumes by Trubbish, but don't eat Trubbish themselves. It's like we might like a flower, like we like bean pods, so we eat the bean, but we don't eat the bush. I don't know. Strawberries. You like strawberries, you're eating the strawberries. I don't know. It gets weird with all of that sometimes. When we look at Garbodor, they absorb garbage and make it part of their bodies. They shoot a poisonous liquid from their right hand fingertips, and Muck is their natural enemy. In specific, Alola, they're a little bit stronger in those areas, probably because of natural predation, and they need to be stronger in order to try and fight them off. The last one I'm going to talk about in this section is Skrelp. Now, this one's going to be very weird. I want to organize these by their primary food source. The reason for this is that any animal, when pushed to the brink, will eat another animal. We have documentation where a tortoise has hunted down a baby chicken, or not a baby chicken, but a baby bird, and did eat it. It was pushed to the brink and needs its nutrition. Turtles are not typically carnivorous or detrivores because they will eat, past animals as well. But animals will do so in their time of need. So, Skrelp, I have here in Detrivore, despite the entry I'm about to say, for a reason. Now, Skrelp, camouflaged as rotten kelp, they spray liquid poison on prey that approaches unawares and then finish it off. But it vanishes into seaweed and remains perfectly still to avoid attacks from large Pokemon. Rotten seaweed is its main food source. So, basing it off a main food source, it is a Detrivore. Now, Dragalge, I will let you argue that it might be an Omnivore at the very least, as it's often found near Dhelmise, and it sprays poisonous liquid on opponents that come near. It gets along with Dhelmise, and since Finizen is the better swimmer, Dragalge will approach it under the cover of seaweed, then immobilize it with a poisonous attack. Very, very arguable that it is an Omnivore. The only reason it is in Detrivore is assuming that its main food source is still rotten seaweed. As such, I didn't want to move it out of here. There are Pokemon that, despite some of their Pokedex entries, I did move up into a more carnivorous area because of these reasons. Again, I wanted to make sure I address any Pokemon that could be seen as other categories, but primarily Detrivore. The other part about it is, Dhelmise is created by sunken ships and the souls of them on there. There's a very good chance that Dragalge either eats people, at least sinks their ships because people are afraid of it and dread being near it, and then when their ship sinks, Dhelmise is created. So Skrelp/Dragalge might be making Dhelmise, which is a terrifying Pokemon. Welcome to Autotrophes. Autotrophes are specifically an organism that is able to form nutritional organic substances from simple inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide, i.e. plants. Now, you will see later that I do have Pokemon that eat rocks and souls as inorganic heterotrophs. The reason for that is I don't see a soul or electricity or a full-on rock, not a mineral, but a full-on rock as a simple inorganic substance. And plus, sometimes they do have to hunt other people or Pokemon, and sometimes they just take the soul, and so on and so forth. So, when we get to inorganic heterotrophs, you could argue they are technically autotrophs, depending on which one they are, but I wanted them separate for the sake of this video. Starting with number 1 on the Pokedex is Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, and its Mega/Gigantamax. It stated that Bulbasaur can go days without eating, it uses photosynthesis, and it gains nourishment from the seed on its back. As such, it's pretty cut and dry. It performs photosynthesis, it's an autotroph. Then we move on to Cleffa, Clefairy, Clefable, which gets a little bit tricky, as their Pokedex does state that they dance in the moonlight all night long, only to stop and drink water in the morning, which is a 12-hour thing. They're non-combative, they live alone, secluded in the mountains, especially once they get into the Clefable line, and are sensitive to sound. So, they stick to themselves, they do their own thing. I doubt that they would attack other Pokemon for their meals. I know a lot of these Pokemon their eyes are front-facing, which would assume that they're predators, and they have sharp teeth, but that's just the way that some Pokemon are designed. As such, that's just the way that it is. It is what it is. They gotta fight. They gotta do something if they gotta defend themselves. So, we're gonna say that the Cleffa line is technically potentially doing some level of photosynthesis, because moonlight is just sunlight, but dimmer. Moving on to Oddish, though, it, during the day, stays in the cold underground to avoid the sun. It grows by bathing in moonlight. Again, autotroph, it's the sunlight, it's just not as harsh. But when we move on to its evolution of Blossom, its flower petals deepen in color through exposure to sunlight. When cloudy weather persists, it does a dance that is thought to be a ritual for summoning the sun. So, very, very sun-based, autotroph, nice and easy. The next one's a little bit of a touch and go. Abracadabra and Alakazam I consider autotrophs. This is based on Abra only sleeping 18 hours in order to get energy, and no other info stated about Abra or the rest of them. I am saying it's an autotroph of sorts that just works out at the library, I guess, since its head gets a little too big for it to carry it without its powers. Hisuian, Voltorb, and Electrode. Now, Hisuian Electrode does state the tissue on the surface of its body is curiously similar in composition to an apricorn. When irritated, this Pokemon lets loose an electric current equal to 20 lightning bolts. So, I mean, we know it's a grass type. We can't assume all grass types are automatically autotrophs that perform photosynthesis, but in this case, plant cells, apricorns. I know apricorns themselves don't necessarily absorb sunlight in order to grow, but I mean, well, seeds do need sunlight to grow. They need water, soil, air. Moving on. Execute. Its 6 eggs use telepathy to communicate among themselves and is believed to carry plant genes and the genes of other species. When we move on to Executor, Executor originally came from the tropics. Its head steadily grows larger from exposure to strong sunlight, and is said that when the head does fall off, they group together to form Execute. The Alolan forms state similar information, and it's very clear it's based off of a palm tree, photosynthesis. When we look into Tangela, its vines are constantly growing, and it flees battle constantly by breaking off vines when grabbed. It doesn't really state anything else regarding it. It's very much a cowardly Pokemon. They are vines. we can make a fair assumption that it's an autotroph. Staryu says that even if its body is torn, it can regenerate as long as the glowing central core remains intact. Real starfish can eat real fish, but I'll argue that Staryu is still an autotroph because the Pokedex says this Pokemon gets nibbled on by Luminian and others. Thanks to its red core, it regenerates fast, so it's unconcerned by their snack attacks. So, as such, this Pokemon, instead of trying to fight back against these fish as a predator would, it instead doesn't care, regenerates. It's got to get that energy from somewhere. We don't know where. We just know that it's from that red core, so it's an autotroph. So Ditto is a pretty easy one, actually, I say, because it can reconstitute its entire cellular structure to change into what it sees, but it returns to normal when it relaxes. My theory on this is that Ditto should theoretically be a very social creature. We've seen it in the games. We've seen how it acts around other Pokemon. It just doesn't like other Ditto and sees them as a competition, as per the Pokédex states. So, as such, I want to argue that due to its friendly nature and the fact that it can reconstitute all of its cells to be that of plant cells of any grass type it's seen, why would it fight other Pokemon? Why would it go after them? I'm sure there could be Ditto that are out there that are omnivorous, that are carnivorous if they've never seen a plant-type Pokemon, which is unlikely. But in this scenario, it makes the most sense that nature is going to choose the path of least resistance. Ditto will become a grass-type Pokemon, perform photosynthesis, and stay away from any threats that may perceive it. Time to talk about the first of the evolutions that I will be covering today, and that's actually Espeon. The Pokédex states, psychic power builds up in the orb on its forehead as it bathes in the sunshine. Espeon is not good at battling at night. Don't actually do this, but could you imagine if there was a drinking game for every single time that I stated like Autotroph or Good to Go or Photosynthesis or something like that? You'd be gone. You'd be gone. So don't do that, but it would be funny. But don't actually do that. That'd be bad for your liver. Leafeon, just like a plant, it uses photosynthesis. As a result, it is always enveloped in clean air. Boom! Pokédex entry said it for us. Chikorita, it uses the leaf on its head to determine the air's temperature and humidity. It loves to sunbathe. With Bayleaf and Meganium, no new info is stated. As such, photosynthesis. Now with Ledybot, I did have to base it on Ledian, and that is a slight jump, considering with Ledian, it says, it is said that in the lands with clean air, where the stars fill the sky, there live Ledian in countless numbers. There is a good reason for this. The Pokemon uses the light of the stars as its energy. And the other part of the Pokédex does state, well, it's believed that starlight provides it with energy. This Pokemon also loves to eat berries. In the daytime, it curls up in the grass to sleep. So, I want to say that its primary form of diet is through photosynthesis of sorts, allowing it to absorb starlight, which, that's not really sunlight. Starlight is like other planets, technically. Maybe other planets exploding, so on and so forth. Yeah, remember that, kids. Every time you look at the stars, that's probably a dead planet. It's cool stuff. Space is awesome. Space and dinosaurs. We'll talk about dinosaurs later and a little bit of space. Wait for Cosmog. Hoppip, nothing is actually stated, but it can also be based on its evolutions. Skiploom spreads its petals to absorb sunlight. It also floats in the air to get closer to the sun. Jumpluff, it doesn't state anything new. So, again, we make the assumption that it's an autotroph that performs photosynthesis for all three. We actually skip Sunkern, oddly enough, and jump straight to Sunflora, because Sunflora converts sunlight into energy. In the darkness after sunset, it closes its petals and becomes still. With Badoo, it doesn't have a diet that's stated, but Roselia, raised on clean drinking water, are known to grow vividly colored flowers. So, likely photosynthesis, it's a rose. Lunatone and Solrock. With Lunatone, its health ebbs and flows with the lunar cycle. It brims with power when exposed to the light of the full moon, and with Solrock, it absorbs solar energy during the day. Both of them are solar energy, or sorry, photosynthesis. Technically solar energy. Are all plants driven by solar energy? I mean, technically you can say that, but that's such a weird thing to say when you're not talking about man-made stuff. Moving on. Turtwig. Photosynthesis occurs across its body under the sun. The shell on its back is actually hardened soil. With Grotle, the shell is hardened soil. Some Pokemon come to peck the berries growing on the trees on its back. And with Torterra, small Pokemon occasionally gather on its unmoving back to begin building their nests. The reason why I wanted to state all three is because it shows that Grotle is, even though these three are lower on the food chain, they're not weak to these other Pokemon. They will mess them up. But when we look at the scientific food pyramids that get created, that's just it. That's what you're going to find. You're going to find that they are lower because you're not going to find a Torterra trying to eat a Chimchar. That's not how it works. Though, again, we can apply the previous knowledge of what I said earlier, and if a Torterra really needs the nutrients and there's a Chimchar lying on the ground, well, it's probably going to eat it. Cherubi, the small ball is not only full of nutrients, it is also tasty. Starly tried to peck it off. So Starly is a natural predator of Cherubi, actually. Sunlight also colors it red, and while it doesn't necessarily say that it uses sunlight to grow because it's using the nutrients in its body to grow, you can't just go and eat an entire box of Flintstone vitamins and not eat, like, for the rest of the week. You need your calories. You need other forms of energy. If you're just getting your nutrients, you're not getting what you need in your body if you're not eating actual food. That's why vitamin supplements exist. And I wish I had a sponsor because this would be the perfect place to put one. Anywho, we're moving on because Cherum, after absorbing plenty of sunlight, Cherum takes this form. It's full of energy. While it's like this, and its liveliness will go on until sundown. I'm not editing that out, and we're just dealing with it. The insanity has already started to kick in. You're in for a ride. The faint scent that emanates from this full blossom entices bug Pokemon to it, so bug Pokemon like to eat Cherum. Snover doesn't have any diet data stated, but it is based off coniferous trees. The berries that grow around its belly are like ice pops, and Galarian and Darumaka absolutely love these berries. Doesn't necessarily say that it eats the Snover, but maybe they're not gentle. With Abomasnow, if it sees any packs of Darumaka going after Snover, it chases them off, swinging its sizable arms like hammers. Both of them likely perform photosynthesis, or pulling stuff from nutrients in the soil, as some carnivorous trees will do. We've jumped into Gen 5 with Snivy. They photosynthesize by bathing their tails in sunlight. When they are not feeling well, their tails droop. When it comes to Servine, when it gets dirty, its leaves can't be used for photosynthesis, so it always keeps itself clean. And Serperior, it generates energy from sunlight, then amplifies that energy dozens of times with its long body. For Pansage, it does say that it's good at finding berries and gathers them from all over, kind enough to share them with its friends. Doesn't necessarily mean that it eats them. It might just know where to find them. It is green. It is, so on and so forth. It could eat them. It is monkey, but it is a pure grass type. So this is one that I would let you argue that it's an herbivore. We also don't have any new data when it comes to Simisage. So once again, you can argue that it's not an autotroph, that it is instead an herbivore. I'll leave that to you. Roggenrola, though, threw me off as they were discovered 100 years ago in an earthquake fissure. Inside each one is an energy core. Also, the hole that you see is its ear. That's not something I was ready to hear about. Boulder and Gigalith have no new data, but considering they don't eat anything, they don't have any other orifice to absorb anything or anything else, we can assume that due to the energy core, it's an autotroph. Or you could argue that it just doesn't eat at all. Doesn't need to, even though its other forms, I think Gigalith has a mouth. But that's an anime. It gets weird. That's why I'm not considering the anime for all of this. Otherwise, they'd be eating rice and calling it donuts in the American version. With Connie and Whimsicott, there's no diet data, but considering it's a plant, they're very light, they're based off of cotton trees, and because of how far they float, and more specifically the cotton tree seeds, I'm just gonna say it's photosynthesis. Petalil, Lilligant, Hisuian Lilligant. No diet data, but likely photosynthesis. It has a big flower on its head that it only opens up when it is forced to or feels like it. I'm falling into the trap of talking about it this way again, just like I did in the explaining every single regional form. I'm moving on. Maractus uses an up-tempo song and dance to drive away bird Pokemon that prey on its flower seeds. Other than saying that it gets preyed on by birds, there's no other diet data. It's a cactus. Photosynthesis. Gothita, on the other hand, now this is an interesting one. Based on the fact that Gothorita states, on nights when the stars shine, this Pokemon's psychic power is at its strongest. It's unknown just what link Gothorita, whatever, has to the greater universe. There is no new data on Gothitelle. Maybe it's an herbivore, but I doubt it's a carnivore, an omnivore, and if it's drawing power from the stars, autotroph. Clink states that interlocking two bodies and spinning around generates the energy they need to live. There's no other data on Clang or Clink Clang, but it has to keep moving in order to generate this energy. It's deriving it from somewhere. That's why it's here. To follow that, if that was perpetual energy, then we can also put Golett and Golurk here. Because with Golett, the energy that burns inside it enables it to move, but no one else has been able to figure out where this energy comes from or what it is. Now you look at Golurk, and the dex entry does state that it may be perpetual energy that produces its limitless energy, but it hasn't been proven. Back to the flowers with Flabebe. As it draws out and controls the hidden power of flowers, the flower Flabebe holds is most likely part of its body. When you get to Floette, it uses red wavelengths of light to pour its own energy into flowers and draw forth their latent potential. That is also the same for its yellow, blue, whatever the other color is. I didn't play X and Y. I'll play it eventually. Maybe I'll do a blind Nuzlocke. We'll see. I stream here. If you made it this far, subscribe, join the streams, check out the other long form content of me doing Nuzlocks and stuff, because that helps support the channel in long videos like this where I go slowly insane from reading 1,025 Pokedex entries. Have I said that yet? Have I said that yet? I'm pretty sure I have. Anywho, back to Florges, which it obtains power by basking in the energy emitted by flowering plants. So it creates plants, and then those plants give it power, and that's how it functions, I guess. Skiddo, if it has sunshine and water, doesn't need to eat because it can generate energy from the leaves on its back. No new data from Go-Go photosynthesis. Helioptile, on the other hand, make their home in deserts. They can generate their energy from basking in the sun. So eating food is not a requirement, and there's no new data on Heliolisk photosynthesis for both of them. Phantump and Trevenant's an interesting one. This one I had to make a hard call on because there's no diet data on Phantump, but Trevenant states, this Pokemon is said to devour anyone daring to ravage the forest. To the creatures dwelling in the forest, it offers great kindness. But that is what it's said to do. In addition, it also states in the Pokédex entries across the board that if you harm the forest, then it harms you. In addition, yes, trees eat people. And no, I'm not talking about D&D nerd stuff or Lord of the Rings where like you have crazy Trents that are going after people or anything like that. No, when you die and go into the ground, the worms will eat you. The trees will decompose your body and use you for their fuel. It is how it works. The top go to the bottom and refuel it all again. Cycle, life cycle. I didn't wear this shirt on purpose, but it works out. Anywho, it's a tree. People decompose. So I'm putting it here as an autotroph. Fomantis goes in here as during the day it sleeps and soaks up light. When night falls, it walks around looking for a safer place to sleep. That's all it does. Bonesweet has a lot of entries on this one because it has a couple of different predators. Delectable aroma emanates from its body, and they're often swallowed whole by a toucan, lured by that wafting deliciousness. It's also too sugary for human consumption, so we've tried to eat it, and the sweat can be watered down to give us a juice that we can drink. It also is appetizing to other bird Pokemon. Greedents like the sweet scent of them and will tuck them away amongst all the berries that it has in its tail and try to carry it away. Then we follow up with Steenie, which states any Corvusquire that pecks at this Pokemon will be greeted with a smack from its sepals, followed by a sharp kick. Serena also states that it will launch fierce, elegant kicks with its long, slender legs and views Quaquaval as its rival. Doesn't necessarily mean that Quaquaval eats it or that it eats Quaquaval, but considering its plant's origins, it doesn't have a mouth, yet it must scream, and everything else, photosynthesis, and it defends itself with a lot of predators coming after, a lot of birds, specifically all these ones that I've named. All right, this is the part where I start saying Pokemon names wrong because I like saying Pokemon names easier, not harder. So Comfey or Comfey attaches flowers to its highly nutritious vine, revitalizing them and giving off an aromatic scent. The vines on its head are sticky and picks the flowers to adorn itself. If it doesn't have any of those flowers, it actually gets uneasy. So what it likely does is it melds with those flowers and then uses a co-symbiotic method of survival where the flowers somehow photosynthesize, even though flowers themselves don't really photosynthesize. The leaves do that, but whatever. Comfey does have leaves on it, and as such, they do the photosynthesis, they are alive, and they provide Comfey with the energy it needs. and those flowers don't wither once they're attached to Comfey, as per its Pokedex. Gossifleur anchors itself in the ground with its single leg and then basks in the sun, absorbing enough sunlight its petals spread as it blooms brilliantly. Followed by Eldegoss, which doesn't state anything different other than other Pokemon can benefit from its highly nutritious seeds. So while it spreads them about, there's a very good chance that those Pokemon do hunt down Eldegoss if they are in need of these nutrients. Sprigatito. Its fluffy fur is similar to composition of plants. This Pokemon frequently washes its face to keep it from drying out. There's no additional data on Florigato or Meowscarada. I know, it's a cat. Cats are only carnivorous. I am placing my bet here because the fur is similar to plants. I am positive, knowing how showy that this Pokemon is meant to be seen as, that it definitely hunts down bird Pokemon and others just for the heck of it. Although probably doesn't go well because it's weak to flying types. So take it as you will. I could see it being argued as a carnivore. I swear this should be the only cat-based Pokemon that isn't a carnivore because all cats are carnivores. This is the only exception. Dolliv basks in the sun to its heart's content until the fruits on its head ripen, and Dolliv departs from human settlements and goes on a journey after that. There's no new data on Arboliva, so photosynthesis for them. But not for our little Smoliv friend. Also, I name all of my Smoliv Martini. Mwah, I love them so much. Capsicid, on the other hand, the more sunlight this Pokemon bathes in, the more spicy chemicals are produced by its body, and it just becomes spicier itself, or the moves that it uses. There's no new data on Scovillain. It's a pepper, it's a plant, photosynthesis. And finally, on the list of Autotrophes, we reach the end with Rellor. It rolls its mud ball around while the energy it needs for evolution matures. Eventually, the time comes for it to evolve. Rabsca states that the body that supports the ball barely moves. Therefore, it is thought that the true body of this Pokemon is actually inside the ball. And it does state an infant sleeps inside the ball, and that Rabsca rolls the ball soothingly with its legs to ensure it sleeps comfortably. It is based off of a true scarab, which is supposed to represent life and rebirth and all that stuff that you're looking at ancient Egyptian belief systems and religions. I know that these Pokemon could very well be, because of dung beetles is what they're also based on, or have some level of capacity to be based off of. You're looking at the fact that it could be a Detrivore, it could be an Herbivore, but something tells me that this Pokemon is not that. Something tells me that it rolls the mud ball. It's not dung, because we have Pokemon that specifically state that they have dung. That it's not that. It's not that it needs to eat anything. That simply existing or gathering stuff onto its ball gives it what it needs. It's weird. I would allow, or I would entertain the argument that it belongs in another category, multiple other categories even. Herbivore, maybe insectivore, Detrivore, but one of those. But with that, we finish off this section of the Autotrophes. I took a look at the recording and I realized you could see every single time I talk a little too closely and the red goes off, also because I put it a little bit too high. So sorry for that. Hopefully that doesn't become too much of an issue as this goes on, and hopefully I'm not blurry and all this other stuff. I do my best with this. Anywho, we're on to the next section of does not eat. I don't need to explain that. It literally does not eat, or I can argue that it doesn't eat. The first on that list is Porygon, a Pokemon that consists entirely of programming code. It is capable of moving freely in cyberspace, and it was made 20 years ago by scientists that hoped that they could, explore space with it. 2 and Z have no new additional info. It has no reason to eat. It's made out of programming code. Done. Bonsly and Sudowoodo, I argue, don't eat. They are based off of petrified wood, and they do state that they don't like getting wet. If they get hit by any level of moisture, they try to get rid of it. They hate moisture, and if it rains, they book it. You've seen how fast those little things run in the not Sun and Moon games, the Scarlet and Violet games. They're monsters. They take off and they're leaving a dust trail behind. Other than that, it doesn't really state its diet. They're not actually trees. They're rocks, again, based off of petrified wood. So they likely don't eat, because if you eat anything that's meat or plants that you would typically find in the wild is going to have some level of moisture to it, which it would then hate. Sunkern, we finally come back to, as it may drop out of the sky suddenly. If attacked by Spearow, it will violently shake its leaves. It lives by drinking only dewdrops from under the leaves of plants. It is said that it eats nothing else. And typically, water that does come off of plants, they might have nutrition, but it's not like it's a filter feeder. I am saying that Sunkern does not eat at all. Unknown doesn't have a diet stated. It is an ancient Pokemon that might come before the known language, and I'm just putting it here because I can. The only one that you could argue that eats are the letters O, P, B, and whatever other one has a hole. That sounds weird. Suicune was thought to endure hunger and not consume anything before its evolution. However, it is now thought that this Pokemon slakes its thirst by drinking rainwater that collects on its silk. This is likely the same for Cascoon. Metapod literally can't eat. Kakuna literally can't eat. Who would have guessed they are cocoons? What do you want them to do? They don't have a mouth. Moving on to Baltoy and Claydol, though. Claydol are said to be dolls of mud made by primitive humans and brought to life by exposure to a mysterious ray. This Pokemon moves about while levitating. It doesn't have a mouth. Again, it's made out of clay. It's a miniature golem. It's a dreidel or top or whatever you want to say. I don't really care. It doesn't eat. I'm saying it does not eat. Castform, its appearance changes based on the weather. Recently, its molecules were found to be just like water. If they're just like water, probably doesn't need to eat. Otherwise, you could argue that it's an autotroph, as it could turn into sunny day form and absorb any sunlight that goes to it. It's also based on the H2O water molecule. So if we also follow those origins, or the fact that it's based off of rain weather dolls that are supposed to bring like good weather fortune, again, none of those things eats. So unless you count absorbing electrons, which it doesn't do anyway. The electrons just kind of float around them. I'm not going to get into that. We're going to move on. Now, I do have it at the top of this section of the food chain, but Dusknoir is said to take lost spirits into its pliant body and guide them home. That does not mean it eats them. It separates them. It is the Grim Reaper. It is the Harvest Man, the one that guides you into the afterlife. So it doesn't eat, which I think is very interesting when we touch on its other forms. But here's the first mega that makes a difference in what it eats or doesn't eat, as Mega Glalie envelops prey in its mouth, freezing them instantly, but its jaw is dislocated, so it's unable to eat them. Mega Glalie cannot eat, so it does not eat. Now we have Shogun. Now I have Shogun in this section because, first off, it doesn't have a mouth, and I know what its Pokedex says, but the idea here is that it doesn't eat or shouldn't eat, because it hardly eats while it waits evolution, and it becomes hardier by enduring hunger, and the shell peels off the instant it begins to evolve. So the idea here is that if it simply doesn't eat, endures the hunger, it evolves faster. That's why it's here. It's a weird one. You can argue, and I would not blame you in the slightest, if it's an omnivore. Beldum, made of magnets, completely magnetic, and it's placed here despite its future entries, which we will talk about later. When we talk about Bronzor and Bronzong, though, it has no diet data stated. They are said to come from ancient tombs and imbued with mysterious power, revered as the bringer of rain as well. It has a little, like, it looks like it has a little, like, it's like a wheat on its back, basically. So that's why. It was also found to be buried underground. So yeah, this thing doesn't eat. Whereas when we look at Spiritomb, there's no diet data on it. You have 108 souls in your body, yet for some reason you decide that food isn't a necessary item. You just decide that you want to cause mischief, which it doesn't state that it gets energy from. It just does it. Spiritomb's that guy. Rotom, its body is composed of plasma and it infiltrates devices. You could say that it draws energy from those devices and it's an inorganic heterotroph, but I want to state that it only does so because it wants to cause mischief and nothing else, that it doesn't really care, because it can enter anything, and so it doesn't eat. Sigilyph says that it was guardians of an ancient city, or that they were guardians emissaries. They're kind of angel-like, and they're pure psychic, and they don't have a mouth, and they have that one creepy eye that likes to stare at you, and they're really cool looking, and they're really scary. So, you know, be not afraid and don't eat. Yamisk has no diet data stated on it, but Galarian Yamisk is likely potentially an autotroph, but I still have it placed here as the clay slab with cursed engravings took possession of a Yamisk. The slab is said to be absorbing the Yamisk's dark power. So the slab is a parasite that's a inorganic heterotroph, but Yamisk itself is just a ghost that exists after we die potentially, and we turn into it carrying our own face as a mask. Pokemon's fun. Don't you want to live in the Pokemon world? I want to be in the Pokemon world. I want to be the greatest master of them all. No new data on Runerigus. Solosis, because their bodies are enveloped in a special liquid, they can survive in any environment. They're also just in there. Now, there's no new data on Duosion or Reuniclus, but Reuniclus has said that drinking the liquid surrounding it grants wisdom. Problem is, the liquid is highly toxic to anything besides Reuniclus itself. So I'd love to just imagine some psychopath such as myself that decides, you know what, I want the world's wisdom, pops Reuniclus, drinks it like a high-C fruit punch box juice, and then just goes, I know the answer to the unit. I actually hurt my knees were not made for falling like that, but you get it. So I'm pretty sure it just doesn't eat because it's inside the liquid. Now we have Vanillite, which I based off of Vanillish. By drinking pure water, it grows its icy body, and it can be hard to find on days with warm, sunny weather. There's no additional data on Vanillux. So it doesn't eat, and it's not a filter feeder because it's pure water, so it just doesn't eat. Also, it's really weird because there's no information stating that we eat it. So maybe it's just pure ice, or looks like pure ice. I know it looks like ice cream, and it looks like vanilla ice cream and everything, and there's probably somebody that decided they wanted to eat it, just like some random crazy psychopath decided that they would grab a cow by the udders and go milking. So, you know, that's one way to do it, I guess, but it's just not a thing, and for some reason people don't do it. Sometimes I wonder how they feel when we have ice cream. Do they consider themselves ice cream? Does the gingerbread man, the gingerbread house, scream because his home is made of the same flesh that he's made out of? What happens here? What happens to the snowman that sits inside of his own ice house or sits on the snow? If it comes to life, everything around it is made of itself. What happens to these things? What happens to Vanillite? How does its psyche hold up? Algium has no diet data, and Behem is kind of funny because it'll just make Double mysteriously disappear. It doesn't mean it eats it. It's a freaking alien. It abducts them. So, I don't know. They abduct them. They don't have a mouth. They're aliens. It's a whole reference. I'm calling it a day, and it doesn't eat. Carbink, on the other hand, sleeps for 1,000,000 years and occasionally is found when caves are excavated. Another thing without a mouth, it makes noises in the anime. It doesn't need to eat. Maybe it photosynthesizes because it sticks around Deontay and absorbs the light off of that crystal. But it doesn't need to. They're just typically found in like massive colonies and when that happens. Mimikyu has no diet data as well, and it likely doesn't eat as it hides its appearance, which does kill others. It can cause a disease apparently to the one scientist that found it, so on and so forth. So it hides itself, but it doesn't actively try to show itself, although it does it in self-defense like it did to Meowth in the anime. Carcol and Colossal are stepped here because it forms coal inside its body and is dropped by this Pokemon to help fuel the lives of people in the Galar region. As such, it seems like it doesn't actually need to eat anything, and it's self-producing some level of one thing or another, which we'll actually get to later when we talk about its first form. Which explains why it doesn't need to eat now. Stonejourner has no diet data. It's a rock. It's a rock. Moving on. Dreepy. I love Dreepy. I love Dreepy so much. It's my favorite Pokemon from Sword and Shield. It actually has a habit of biting Clauncher, but it doesn't feed on them. It explicitly states This is said to be a vestigial behavior from when Dreepy was alive. There's no new additional data on Dracloak or Dragapult, so I'd like to just assume that because it's a ghost in this scenario, this ghost doesn't feed on other Pokemon, people, souls, or anything, and just exists. Knackley, but not its evolutions, I will consider as Pokemon that do not eat other Pokemon or plants or anything like that, and we'll talk about that later because it's very scary what its evolutions could do. I don't want to be near Garganacl, but Knackley scrapes its body as it travels, leaving salt behind, which is constantly created and replenished inside of its body. So it's just naturally growing and doesn't need to eat. It doesn't say how that's done. It's leaving it behind. So it's not that it's taking inorganic substances and growing itself. It is just naturally producing it itself off of nothing and leaving itself behind. So we're going to say it just doesn't eat and magic because I can't science that one out. Then we have Greavard and Houndstone, which there's no new diet data on it. It's very sad because it's said to be a Pokemon that never knew the love of another trainer or person, so it died alone. I hope you're proud of yourself. Pure ghost type, you know? The only dog Pokemon that's going to be in this list that's probably not an omnivore. So it just doesn't eat. It's pure ghost, and yeah. And we finish this section off with Goldango. Its body seems to be made of 1,000 coins, and this Pokemon gets along well with others, and it's quick to make friends with anybody. So, due to its friendly nature and its complete form of 1,000 coins, we're going to say that it doesn't eat. We move on to Nectarivores. Nectarivores are specifically animals that derive their energy and nutrient requirements from a diet consisting of mainly or exclusively sugar-rich nectar produced by flowering plants. The first on this list is Combee. Who would have guessed? The members of this trio spend all their time together. Each one has a slightly different taste in nectar, which makes it a Nectarivore. There's also no new data on Vespiquen, but considering it orders Combee around, we can safely assume it's also a Nectarivore. Mothim loves the honey of flowers and steals honey collected by Combee, scattering its steel-colored scales as it flaps its wings. Despite being observed to feed primarily on the nectar of flowers, it's not seen often around flower gardens, so while it doesn't feed on Combee, at least it's not explicitly stated, it probably steals the nectar from them as well. Oricorio, who'd have guessed? It's based off of a hummingbird, and as such, it drinks the color nectar that it turns into. Cutiefly feeds on the nectar and pollen of flowers. Because it's able to sense auras, it can identify which flowers are about to bloom, which is really cool, I think. Ribbonbee rolls up pollen into puffs, which it can use for food or in battle. Now, this is going to be one of the times where I'm going to tell you here and now. Those are the dex entries that state anything about it eating stuff or being prey to stuff, which it doesn't say anything about it being prey to stuff. But when we see future dex entries, this is why this is one big video. Because Cutiefly and one other Pokemon are in like 30 different dex entries as a prey. I wish this was better organized, but this is why I had to read every single dex entry for every single Pokemon of every generation. Do you see why I went insane? Subscribe. And please tell me what Pokemon questions you would like answered. Maybe a short one, maybe a long one. I'll make a list. I'm just trying not to go that crazy. I'm gonna put the glasses on so I don't look as tired. I'm not that tired, I swear. Butterfree loves the honey of flowers and locates flower patches that even have the tiniest amount of pollen, which there's nothing in real life that only eats honey, so I'm gonna be leaving it where it is here. And that was a short section, honestly. So it's time to move on to the herbivores. Herbivores are animals that feed on plants. But, here's where I derive a little bit of a difference when it comes to the Pokemon world. There are going to be Pokemon that feed on other plant Pokemon because they are plant Pokemon. Their cells are plants. They are not going to necessarily be considered carnivores. That is going to be the strange twist and weird difference that needs to happen here. Because if something is considered 100% plant cells, but it's alive, it's just a plant. I don't care if it has a face. Scientifically, it is a plant. So, keep that in mind as we move forward through this section of herbivores. Also, I'm going to tell you right now, when I was doing my double checking, I had things in the wrong section when it came to the organization of it, even though I knew what section they belonged in. So we don't start with the first herbivore of generation 1. Instead, we start with Phalanx, which has no diet data on it. It doesn't, I get that it doesn't have a mouth, but ultimately is a very orderly Pokemon. It's based off of the Spartans, or more over their helmets, and is very defensive when challenging others. It relies on teamwork, so on and so forth, right? So I imagine that it isn't going to necessarily be a Pokemon that is going to go out hunting. It just likes to boss around its own self. The one with the big old horn on its head likes to boss around the rest of them, and is said to be followed without question in terms of its orders. So why would you put it has to learn to not put its companions into danger. It does show that in the anime, actually. But I'm just gonna say it's an herbivore based on just how I feel. I'm not gonna lie to you. Based on how I feel, you can argue that maybe it doesn't eat. You can argue that maybe it's an omnivore. I could see all of that. Pincurchin feeds on seaweed, using its teeth to scrape it off of rocks. Nice and easy. We move on to Appletun. As soon as it's born, it burrows into an apple. Not only does the apple serve as its food source, but the flavor of the fruit determines its evolution, making its other forms actually sit elsewhere. Hatena, Hattrem, and Hatterene don't have any data on them whatsoever when it comes to diet. They can sense strong emotion, but it doesn't say that it eats any strong emotions. They exist in their forest on their own time, unmoisturized, no makeup. Hashtag no filter. I don't know. They're just doing their own thing. I don't know what you want from me. I'm gonna say that they're herbivores. They don't like to be around things. I know Hattrem can notice the emotions of another creature from 30 miles away and then go deck it in the face because it's too strong of an emotion. So it's probably isolated because other animals or Pokemon could be technically considered pure emotion or whatever. So it's an herbivore. You know, as I'm going through this, I'm realizing how much of this information is memorized in my head. Like, if you see me look ever so slightly this way, that is where my script is. If I'm looking anywhere else, I'm not reading a script. It's all in this head of mine. You're watching a man go insane. I'm not even halfway through this list. I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you enjoy this. Anywho, move on to Morpeko. As it eats the seeds stored up in its pocket-like pouches, it satisfies the constant hunger and generates electricity. It's a seed eater. It's a hamster. I said seed eater and immediately made me remind me of the VeggieTales weed eater. So that put a little chuckle in my head. Dracozolt in ancient times was unbeatable thanks to its powerful lower body, but it went extinct anyway after it depleted all its plant-based food sources. So as such, it defended itself. Think like the Brachiosaurus. Think like a giraffe. Think like any other, not Pokemon, I was gonna say Pokemon. Think of other animals, real-life animals that existed in the past or modern day, like lions. They will not typically hunt giraffes because they're just gonna, bah, you know? Quaxley, Quaxwell, Quackleval has no diet data. Quaxley, though, its strong legs let it swim around even in fast-flowing rivers, and it likes to keep things tidy and is prone to overthinking things. Too tidy for meats, and it's also a duck. Yes, I know some ducks will eat fish, but a lot of them will also just eat like algae and, you know, other just plants or seeds. Or you fed bread to a duck. Don't feed bread to ducks. It's a bad idea. It's not good for their digestive system. Feed them, I don't know, look it up. Look up your natural resources department stuff and learn about animals like you are now as we move on to Lechonk, which searches for food all day. It possesses a keen sense of smell but doesn't use it for anything other than foraging. There's also no other new data on Oinkalum. Yes, I understand. It might eat Appletun, as we will talk about later. Appletun is a grass type and it's trying to eat the apple pie on its back, not Appletun itself, or at least drink the nectar, so it is not above Appletun. That is why it is here. Blipbug is often found in gardens, so it eats plants. It's a caterpillar. Meanwhile, there's no other new data on Dottler and Orbeetle, which, I mean, it basically just becomes a ladybug, and then it becomes a UFO. Pokemon really do be taken after Digimon these days. Squawkabilly has no diet data, but it has a rounded beak, so it probably just eats seeds, as would your average round beak burb would. Meanwhile, you have Charcadet, which its firepower can increase to over 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, which I only bring up because its dex entry also adds that it likes to eat berries that are rich in fat, so it's burning the fat to use for fuel. Pretty cool, I think. There's no new data on Armarouge or Cerulege, though Armarouge evolved through the use of a set of armor that belonged to a distinguished warrior. It's likely still an herbivore, but then you have Cerulege, who likely doesn't eat. I mean, maybe it takes the souls of others, but its primary move doesn't necessarily say that it actually eats the soul. So we're gonna say that they're herbivores, or they don't eat for that one, but I'd like to say that they're herbivores, even if it's just for their fuel. Shroodle and Grafai have no diet data, but Shroodle sinks its sharp poison front fangs or teeth out only when things anger it, which will cause paralysis. Doesn't say that it eats it though, and with Grafai, the saliva poison depends on what the Pokemon actually eats. It then covers their fingers in saliva and then draws the patterns on the forest trees. I'm gonna say that it's probably fairly low on the food chain in that area, considering Zora just kind of roam around, and we have a couple of like Shroomish and everything, which we'll talk about later. So it probably stays away from a lot of that, probably just eats berries, mixes them up, and then calls it a day. You could argue that it's an omnivore, but I'm gonna say that it's an herbivore for my sake. Flittle runs around the wastelands and will attack anyone that steals its beloved berries as it exacts its revenge, while Espathra doesn't say anything different, so easy herbivore. Tink is an interesting line to have here. Now, I know that the first thing you're gonna say is that Tinkaton goes after Corviknight. Yes, that is true. There are cases in real life where there are animals that will go after creatures higher up on the food chain for their needs. This is one of those cases, though, that it doesn't eat Corviknight, it just strips it apart, taking apart its flesh and using it as its hammer. That's not terrifying at all. So we're going to talk about Tinkatink, swinging its handmade hammer around to protect itself, which is stolen by Pokemon that eat metal. Whereas its evolution will then attack groups of Poniard and Bisharp, gathering metal from them in order to create a large and sturdy hammer. And then finally, as we've talked about, Tinkaton will just strike down Corviknight, being super ambitious is what we're going to call it, as this Pokemon doesn't even learn a proper move that's strong against Corviknight, but goes after them anyway and succeeds, as we've seen. This might be the most controversial decision that I've made out of this entire one, and I will explain myself. You need to listen to me on this one. Charmander has a preference for hot things, and it states nothing more. Charmeleon also doesn't state anything different other than it likes to fight, and Charizard explicitly states that in the ORAS Pokedex that, however, it never turns its fiery breath on any opponent weaker than itself. As such, we can safely assume it is an herbivore. It likes to use its fire. It straight up says in the Pokédex that it likes to set forest fires. It does it intentionally. Now, you could say that's very much like the birds of prey that are in Australia that will set fires in order to let them run out, which is what Fletchender does. And that's actually the hawk that it's based off of, which is really cool, but we'll talk about that later. Sorry, the brain kicked in. The alternative to this is that maybe, yes, it just does use its claws, or it can survive in water, so it could go fishing. I will obviously take my step back if you want to say it's an omnivore, and say that, you could say it's an omnivore. But if something is weaker than it, why would it go after that? That's the whole point of prey. That's the whole idea of creature versus creature, predator versus prey. You go after the weaker creature knowing that it's going to be your form of sustenance. If the Charizard is constantly going after something stronger, it either dies and there's less of it, or it only eats the things that are above it on the food chain because it's stronger than it. So, by all means, it's probably low on the food chain. And again, could be an omnivore, but I'm gonna say it's an herbivore. And I understand if you argue me on that. Caterpie has a voracious appetite. It can devour leaves bigger than his body right before your eyes. Weedle eats its weight in leaves every single day. And while Beetle is very territorial and combative, there's nothing about it saying that it hunts prey. I want to be 100% clear that once again, unless I strictly state it, if the Pokemon are in the same box or they are very, very clearly separated from the box above the rest of them, as I have explicitly stated, then all of them are just kind of in the same area of this process that I'm doing. I don't want anybody to get confused by getting, the idea that, oh, Caterpie is above Charizard. No, Charizard is very definitely above Caterpie. It's just they're in the same grouping. Pichu assumedly eats berries because Pikachu will roast the berries with its electricity. Raichu also doesn't state any new information other than the Alolan form loving pancakes, which is so cute and makes me want pancakes every single time I think about it. Nidoran specifically states that the females are more sensitive to smells than males, and while foraging, they'll use the whiskers to check wind direction and stay downward of its predators. Nidorina, Nidorino, and Nidoqueen don't state anything different. I will stick them here, although you can argue that Nidorino is an omnivore, as we'll talk about Nidoking later. Igglybuff, Jigglypuff, Wigglytuff has no entry on food, but it does state that if it sings for too long, it hurts them and puts their life in danger, which means that they don't get energy from singing and they need to breathe. So they're likely not autotrophs, and they're probably just regular herbivore. Meanwhile, you get Paris, which specifically states that the Tochikaso growing on this Pokemon's back orders it to extract juice from tree trunks. Parasect is also known to infest large trees to basically just drain it of nutrients and then move on to another tree all at once. The bug itself is mostly dead, with the mushroom on its back having become the main body. If the mushroom comes off, the bug stops moving. So this is a weird question of, is it the Pokemon or the mushroom? Is the Pokemon actually the mushroom? It gets weird. This is one of those cases where it makes me terrified and wonder if those mushrooms could attach to us in the future. And I don't want to find that out. And I don't want to see it attached to any other Pokemon. That's scary. Diglett states that it chews on plant roots underground, which is very much reminiscent of moles. I know moles in real life are also insectivores that will eat bugs. But considering that is what it primarily eats, we stick it here. And Dugtrio and their Alolan forms don't state anything different, so we leave them right here. Poliwag states nothing, but tadpoles eat things like pondweed in order to survive, so it goes in herbivore. Now, when we look at Ponyta, Rapidash, and its Galarian variants, it also states nothing, but think about what horses eat. Farfetch will eat its stick as emergency rations, and they live where reedy plants grow. They're rarely seen, so it's thought that their numbers are decreasing. Other than that, the Galarian form and Sirfetch don't state anything different, so they get to eat their leek in peace. Cubone, Marowak, and Alolan Marowak don't state anything other than the fact that they knock down Mandibuzz, and Mandibuzz are their natural predator. They make friends with Pokemon and protect them, often mourning them by dancing after they have passed away. Also, their flames leave nothing behind, as they don't extinguish in water even. They don't extinguish unless the Alolan Marowak wants that. So, I mean, it collects bones, but it doesn't say anything about eating the bones either. So we're going to say it's an herbivore, which I could understand. If you're bothered, then why would you want to do that to another Pokemon? That's just depressing. You know how that depression works. So why would you do that to something else? It's a very emotional and understanding Pokemon. Empathetic. That's the word. Tyrogue, Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, and Hitmontop, despite their human inspiration, I am going to argue that they are herbivores. They don't hunt. One of them doesn't have a mouth, and they only train and like stronger opponents. I mean, I guess you can argue that Hitmonlee just doesn't eat, but I don't know. I feel like if the others eat, then it probably eats too. Happiny, Chansey, and Blissey, they protect and give their eggs to people, which other people in Pokemon, which are very nutritious. And if you eat their egg, it actually revitalizes you rather quickly for your recovery. So they could have been hunted in the past for these eggs, but they're not necessarily like directly hunted by anything. They also work really well with people in Pokemon. So I'm gonna say it's because of their caring nature, they are just herbivores. Kangashkan protects its baby out of maternal instinct and has no mention of hunting whatsoever. Also, it's based off of a kangaroo, and kangaroos don't eat meat. If you say that it's based off of marsupials in general, I don't care. It's a kangaroo. It literally has a joey in its pouch. So it's a kangaroo. Kangaroos don't eat meat. Moving on. Mime Jr., Mr. Mime, Galarian Mr. Mime, and Mr. Rhyme don't state anything about their diet. Although it is really funny that if Mr. Mime performs and nobody like does their little claps and is all happy for it, then it might attack them, but it doesn't say anything about like killing them. It just gives them a double slap and walks away, assumedly. So, you know, it just lives its life and is a mediocre mime. Hopefully one doesn't just appear behind me and try to hunt me down in my sleep or something. You know, that'd be terrifying. It's a fairy type Pokemon. Let it in the window. Smoochum, it examines things by touching it with its lips because it has a bunch more nerves in its lips, which is really weird. Although if it gets anything, like if it gets dirty on the lips, it actually licks it completely clean. Jinx also states nothing new. So assuming it's very particular about what it eats and the textures and so on and so forth, and that it doesn't want it to get dirty at all, I imagine that it wouldn't hunt down Pokemon. It doesn't also look like a Pokemon that would survive that. So we're just gonna say that it eats plants. Tauros and Paldean Tauros states nothing about prey, but that it's very combative. Bulls also don't eat meat. Lapras, okay, it's based off of Nessie, so I will allow people to argue it, but considering its intelligence and how compassionate this Pokemon is, I doubt that it would actually eat other Pokemon. It is a Pokemon that's been hunted and overhunted to almost extinction and will ferry people across the water. It's very friendly. So despite its potential origins being what it is, I'm gonna say that it's an herbivore. Eevee doesn't state anything about it being an herbivore or anything, but because of its friendliness, I'm gonna say it's an herbivore. Jolteon and Glaceon actually don't state anything different either, so I'm gonna stick them here as well. Natu usually forages for food on the ground, but on rare occasions, it'll hop onto branches and peck at the shoots. It'll also eat food from the cactus plants. Most likely they're fruiting flowers and everything like that, which a lot of animals actually find very delicious and very nutritious, in addition to allowing a lot of water into their system. Xatu assumedly does the same, but it just meditates as a form of indirect fasting because it doesn't say that it absorbs energy from the sun. It just stares at it hauntingly, waiting for the future that might come to pass. Mareep, Flaffy, and Ampharos are sheep. So I swear to Arceus, if somebody tries and tells me that they eat anything else other than plants, I will sick Gyarados on you. Apom uses its tail to pluck fruits that are out of its reach, and the tails are real adept. So they'll just kind of, especially when it reaches actually Ambipom, will actually just take its two hands and just shuck them with ease. So it just rarely uses its regular arms and uses its big old tail hands. Wynaut loves to eat sweet fruits. Cleverly picks fruits using its ear-like arms. Oh, I read that, but I didn't read that before this. Those are arms? Why are Pokemon like this? They gather in fruit gardens drawn by the fragrance, and Wobbuffet states nothing different, but it is really funny that considering the word buffet is in its name, Wobbuffet ironically competes to see which Wobbuffet can go the longest without eating. Here's a nice and easy one. Girafarig specifically states A Girafarig is an herbivore, eating grass and tree shoots. While eating, its tail makes chewing and swallowing motions as if it was also eating, which is very cute. Farigorif states nothing different. Shuckle hides under rocks and actually keeps berries inside of its shell, which mix with its juices, which becomes a juice that people drink, apparently. So it doesn't hunt Shuckle, but that's not, I'm not drinking Shuckle juice. Heracross will actually sip honey and chases off intruders if they come near. They'll also drink tree sap in general, which is its favorite food. Now, Teddy Ursa is here as it always licks honey. Its palm tastes sweet because of the honey it has absorbed, and Ursaring explicitly states although it is a good climber, it prefers to snap trees with its forelegs and eat fallen berries. I understand. You can argue that a bear is an omnivore, and I understand because fish exist. But based on this information, as opposed to the bears that we will talk to from other generations, I am saying that Teddy Ursa and Ursaring are herbivores. Also, Ursaluna and Blood Moon Ursaluna, even though I don't have it on the chart, don't say anything different, so they get to stay here too. Swinub has a very sensitive nose and forages for mushrooms, berries, and hot springs buried under ice, so that's fantastic. Piloswine also digs up food under the ice, and Mammothswine doesn't state anything new, so they all get to stay here together. Phampi and Donphan don't state anything in their Pokedex, but they're based on elephants. Done. Stantler, on the other hand, has no diet stated as well, but it's a reindeer, so it's most likely just an herbivore. Same thing goes on for Weirdeer. Smeargle has no diet stated, which, while based on a beagle, I'm gonna argue that it's an herbivore due to its tail colors and diet and ability to color or copy moves, because I know the diet wasn't stated, but with all the vibrant colors, you would expect it to get berries. Maybe it does, doesn't eat them. Maybe it is an omnivore because it's based off of the beagle, but maybe it eats the berries and eats some of them, uses it as the paste as well, tool and food, just like Ribbon Bee uses for pollen. I would understand if you argue that it's an omnivore. Miltank produces highly nutritious milk, supporting the lives of people and Pokemon alike since ancient times. It's also a cow. Wurmple loves to eat leaves and is targeted by Starly a lot, alongside other bird Pokemon such as swallows specifically. Dustox is instinctively drawn to light, and the swarms of them will strip leaves off of the roadside trees for food. C-Dot hangs off of the branches of trees and absorbs the nutrients for them. Eventually it becomes so heavy that its body just drops from the tree. There's no new info on Nuzleaf, but Shiftry, which is kind of fun to talk about, is said to arrive on a chilly, wintry winds. Feared from long ago as the guardian of forests. This Pokemon lives in a deep forest where people do not venture. So, I mean, maybe it, does eat other Pokemon, but if it's very solitary, I'm gonna say that it stays an herbivore. Breloom we finally get to, as it actually feeds on trees and plants in fields and forests, unlike Shroomish, which specifically stated that it eats leaf litter and so on. Slackoth lolls around for over 20 hours a day. Because it moves so little, it doesn't need much food, and its meal consists of just 3 leaves. Doesn't say the size, just 3 leaves. No new info on Vigoroth, but Slacking just lays down and eats the ground around it until there's no grass, and then it decides to move again, so that's kind of funny. Nincada is just like any other cicada that it's based off of, and just eats tree roots over the course of more than 10 years or more. Ninjask, on the other hand, will feed on tree sap. Whisper doesn't have a diet stated, but Loudred stamps its feet to power up, and Exploud has sound generating organs. So I'm gonna say that they're herbivores, but if they stamp their feet and clap their hands and that's how they get their energy through impact, that would be an autotroph technically. Maybe an inorganic heterotroph. That's a weird one. Let's see what you think in the comments below, I guess. With Skitty, I know what I said. I know what I said earlier. But Skitty and Delcatty I placed here, despite them being cats, is because Skitty is very playful, lives in the holes of trees and forests, and is very adorable, whereas Delcatty will never get into a fight, the Pokédex states. It will just move away somewhere else. As such, we can make the weird assumption that this feline Pokemon also doesn't eat meat. Unless it's served to them, but if you're looking at natural, like wild versions of them, it probably doesn't eat meat. Again, I understand if you would place it somewhere else, but basing it solely on the Pokedex, first and foremost, it would not eat meat. Meditite survives on one singular berry a day, and Medicham will actually meditate a whole month without eating, so that's pretty cut and dry. Meanwhile, you get Plusle and Minun, and while I almost put them in Inorganic Heterotrophs because they absorb electricity from telephone poles, you'll find out very quickly that some electric Pokemon, they have their electric organ, as Pokemon the game likes to say, but that doesn't mean they actually generate it or consume it for energy. They just store it and use it. So the reason why I say that and why they're in herbivores is because Minun promotes blood circulation and relaxes its muscles by being exposed to electricity. And it actually says it for both Minun and Plusle in Minun's Pokedex. Spoink loves to eat mushrooms that are underground, and it does carry a pearl from Clamp Pearl on its head. It doesn't mean that it makes it its food, even though we're going to find out some interesting information about Clamp Pearl later. Clamp Pearl produces a pearl. Clamp Pearl is not the pearl that it produces. Grumpig doesn't have any new data, so it stays here. Swablu and Arteria don't say anything about their diet, although Swablu will endure the winter, and their flocks will move closer to towns in the spring. They both have a rounded beak. I understand that Altaria is a dragon-type Pokemon, but their fluffy clouds, their nice natures, and their rounded beaks are going to make me say that they are an herbivore, primarily consisting on seeds. Tropius actually just ate fruit. It's actually, I don't want to say fruitarian, fruitivore. What would that even be called? I should have looked that up. I'm not gonna. I don't really care right now because it would be the only one in that category. But in the end, it would still be under herbivore, as the only reason it grows bananas on it, the only reason Banana Chin exists is because of the fact that it just continually ate bananas. So theoretically, a Tropius could just consistently eat apples over and over again and grow apples. And humans, children specifically, like to pluck apples and stuff from them. You can say the same about Pokemon probably, and it doesn't seem to have an issue with it. I base Chingling off of Chimecho and the fact that it hangs from tree branch or the eaves of buildings using a suction cup on its head and will pluck berries with its long tail and eats them. Absol I base on the Mega Absol entry, which states that it doesn't like to fight and that it just changes into this form when it has no real choice, when it has to for a battle. So if it doesn't like fighting, it's not a very social creature. It's probably going to consist on berries or other plants. Chimchar is fueled by gas made in its belly. Now, that's the only bit of data that it states, and Monferno and Infinite say nothing about eating any sort of meat. Primates in general don't eat meat. Bidoof gnaws on logs and rocks to whittle down its teeth, and honestly, that's just what beavers do. They just eat wood and plants and leaves. There's also no new data on Bibarel, so it's an herbivore. Shieldon specifically states that it uses its face to dig up tree roots to eat. Any frontal attack is then repulsed by it, and that it feeds on grass and berries as well. It lived in the same environment as Rampardos, and they fought each other to the finish, as the Pokedex says. So they fought to the death, and we'll talk about Rampardos later. Burmy and Romodam don't have a diet entry, but they're based off of bagworms. Bagworms just eat plants and trees. Pachirisu stores berries in tree holes, so that's fairly straightforward. Baneri and Lopunny are bunnies. They're rabbits. More specifically, scientifically correct, bunnies don't exist. It's just rabbits. So, you know, you've been conditioned. They're not different. Bunnies don't exist. Anywho, they don't say anything about their diet, so we can assume that it's just a regular rabbit diet. Chatot actually mimics the cries of other Pokemon in order to trick them and actually escape. It's because they won't attack it then. So could you just imagine sitting in front of like a Hydreigon and you're about to eat a Chatot and it says Hydreigon back at you and you're like, oh, hey, yeah, that's my boy. And you walk away only to go home and go, wait, that guy earlier didn't have 3 heads. It has a rounded beak, so it probably just eats seeds. Hippopotas and Hippowdon, or as I like to say, Hippopotamus, they're based on hippos, which are primarily herbivores. So we can safely assume that Hippopotamus and Hippowdon are also herbivores. Croagunk fights rarely, but that is strictly to ensure survival. And it's also popular as a mascot, apparently. There's no new data on Toxicroak, so if you have a Pokemon that fights rarely, then yeah, I guess you can argue eating is to strictly ensure survival. But if you have alternative methods like eating berries, that's not strictly ensuring your survival. That's preying on other Pokemon. Oshawott uses its Scout Chop to break open hard berries. Meanwhile, there's no new data on Duwas or Unnovan Samurott. Pansear, when angered, will make its head tough reach 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which it'll also use to roast berries. Simisear also loves sweets, apparently, because they become the energy for the fire burning inside of its body. So technically an herbivore. I mean, it could just eat sweet berries in the wild, so they're both herbivores. Panpour doesn't say anything about its diet, so it drinks clean water, or it generates clean water. It's likely an herbivore. Technically could be a filter feeder, but because it's clean water, I doubt it. With Blitzel and Zebstrika, no diet, but they're a zebra. They eat grass and whatever else zebras eat. Audino touches others with its feelers on its ears, using the sound of their heartbeats to tell how they're feeling, which I know that's not diet-based, but Audino gets so much hate. I know they're seen as XP bags in the game. I saw them as that, don't get me wrong, but they're so cute, and that's so adorable, and that makes my heart be happy. So it's an herbivore. It seems so compassionate. How could I ever believe it's anything but? Timber, Girder, Conkeldurr, they have no diet data, but they are also very social Pokemon, and most social Pokemon I can say are probably just herbivores. Temple, based on tadpoles. Nice and easy. Eat moss. Throw has no diet data, but it likes a challenge and challenging opponents, and Sock also has no diet data, focusing on training alone, so they subsist on herbivorous stuff. I don't know why I said it like that. Swaddle makes clothes for itself and chews up leaves and sews them into sticky thread extruded from its mouth. It probably also eats those leaves, and it's really cute because fashion people in the Pokemon world have looked at Swaddle and decided, hey, you know fashion. We're gonna learn from you. Check it out. Swaddling will protect itself, wrapping itself up in leaves, and it stays on the move eating leaves in forests. Meanwhile, Levany will care for small Pokemon, wrapping them in leaves by using the sticky silk secreted from its mouth. And yes, those leaves are actually used as clothing, so it's not just, you know, creating a trap for these Pokemon. It is a genuinely caring Pokemon. It goes from, I mean, it literally goes swaddle, like you swaddle a baby, and then becomes Levany, which is very reminiscent of like a very motherly individual, considering how it cares for others and how it evolves, actually, which I believe is through friendliness, happiness, or love. I don't quite remember. One of the three. Darumaka, Darmanitan, and the Galarian variants. There's no data other than Galarian Darmanitan saying that it comes down to where people live and it stashes food and snowball on its head, taking it home for later. They are gorilla-based creatures, so that's what stopped me from saying it's an omnivore. So it's safe to say that they're just an herbivore. Scraggy, I'm going to base off of Scrafty, and that it beats up anything that enters its territory, and they can't spit an acidic liquid from their mouth, but it just likes to fight. It's based off of the word scrappy, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it fights. It also has, like, the teeth that it has are blunt, which isn't very fit for chewing meat. Minccino and Chinchino are based off of chinchillas and have no diet data. Eat seeds and plants, chief. Ducklet will wander around water eating their favorite food, which is peat moss. There's no other data on Swanana, and you could argue that it's an omnivore, as swans will eat tadpoles, insects, and mollusks. But again, because we're basing it primarily on the pokedex first and foremost, I'm going to say that it's an herbivore, but I understand the arguments. Deerling will eat up plant shoots, and farmers will try to get them to go away, which is kind of scary because they will actually have several lichen rock on their premises to push them away because they're the natural enemy of deerling. So we can say that lichen rock eat deerling. There's no other data on sawsbuck, so assume that it's the same. Emolga loves sweet berries, stuffing its cheeks so full that it actually can't fly properly, which out of all the Pikachu clones, I dare say that Emolga is arguably my favorite. It's very cute, and it's based off of flying squirrels, maybe even sugar gliders. First seed, it'll actually scrape up the mosses to actually eat, and allow its spikes to grow big and strong. Axew will use their tusks to crush berries that they eat. Repeated regrowth makes their tusks strong and sharp. So if they ever break their tusk, it just comes back stronger. Shelmet has no diet data. It's likely based off of snails, which is an herbivore, and there's no other data on Axelgore. I mean, it goes from snail to slug. Mienfu and Mienshao don't talk about any form of prey. It only talks about it fighting opponents, and like many of the other fighting types, we're gonna say that it doesn't really have prey. Buffalant has no diet data, but it is based on buffaloes. Durant specifically state that they will feed on leaves and they protect their eggs from Sandaconda. Larvesta has no diet data, but it's based off of Atlas moths and one other moth or two, but those will eat their eggshell that they are born in and then the leaves. I will not say that it's a carnivore because it ate its eggshell. An eggshell is an organic substance, and a lot of creatures eat their eggshell on their way out because it contains the first vital nutrients that it needs, like calcium, in order for an animal in real life to actually survive their first few days. And there's no additional data on Volcarona. Some moths simply don't eat. They can survive on water. It all depends on their previous form and how much it ate, honestly. Sometimes those creatures will eat enough that their mothy form don't need to eat until the day that they pass, because they only last a few days. Chespin states that eating lots of berries makes the bark shell that covers Chespin's head and body grow sturdier. There's no new diet on Quilladin or Chestnut, though Chestnut does state that it has a gentle disposition, but will fight back if bothered. So, safe herbivore. That actually is a grass type that doesn't use photosynthesis. Fennekin's a weird one as well. I understand that foxes will eat anything. They are Detrivores. They are Omnivores. They just eat. Twigs make for Fennekin's snacks, nibbling on them. There's no additional information on a Brexian or a Delphox. It also works well with allies, so that could just be other foxes of its type. It's arguable omnivore. Bunnelby doesn't really state the diet, but it does sever roots without any real effort. Doesn't mean that it necessarily eats it, but it is a rabbit, and there's no other information on Diggersby. Scutterbug will eat poisonous leaves and roots and have no issue with it. In addition, Spewpaw actually gets attacked by Rufflet, and it does retaliate with the poison it creates from a lot of that. There's no other additional information on Vivillon, but safe assumption that they're all herbivores. I've been doing this for like 2 hours now. I'm slowly going crazy. Spritzy and Aromateas, there's no diet data on them, but Spritzy does state that the scent it emits enraptures those who smell it. It depends on what it's eaten that the smell smells like. Considering they're based on a plague doctors and their beaks would be full of aromatics, rosemary, lavender, and so on, we can safely assume that none of it is meat that this Pokemon eats to then create whatever it's gonna make, despite its sharp, curved, hooked beak. Swirlix eats nothing but sweets. Its fur is as sticky and sweet as cotton candy, and there's no other extra data on Slurpuff. Binacle actually eats seaweed that washes up on the shoreline, and there's no additional information on Barbaricle, but considering what it looks like, I would have expected it to eat way more than just seaweed, and that is terrifying, but it is a barnacle. Grubbin usually lives underground and just slurps out sap from trees. though it does have natural enemies like Rickety, which actually might run away rather than getting absolutely snapped by its big old pincers in the front, which could snap thick tree leaves. In addition, Chargebug is protected by its sturdy shell and eats large quantities of fresh and decomposing leaf litter in order to evolve. Crabballer will actually punch trees in order to have berries fall down and eat them, training itself and eating food at the same time. But what's really funny is that if it accidentally punches an Executor in a Lola and try to climb it, that Executor will shake it off and just There's no new diet data with Crabominable, but some trainers bring Lechonk into the mountains just to find them because the pincers are apparently delicious. So we eat Crabominable, apparently. It's probably because it's based off of Alaskan crab or snow crab. Amora lived in a cold land where there were no violent predators like Tyrantrum. And there's no other data on Aurorus. Considering what it's based off of, we're looking at a Brachiosaurus, we can easily state that it was an herbivore. Hawlucha doesn't say anything about prey or predators, just that it likes to fight Primeape because it's its enemy. Other than that, I mean, yeah, it's kind of hawk-like, I suppose, very osprey-ish. But that doesn't mean that it will actually eat meat. Denone shares the location of food or electricity with one another. It's funny because it does stay in the Pokedex that if your electricity bill suddenly goes, then it's most likely because a Denone is harnessing your electricity. So that's a cute little thing. Noibat has fruit as its favorite food and picks out the ripe ones using its sonar. And sometimes it mistakes Appletun for food. Doesn't necessarily mean that it eats it. Just like we wouldn't say, you know, sharks actively try to eat us. It's a mistake. Pick-a-Peck will actually eat berries, and then the leftover seeds are used as ammunition that it fires from its mouth. Mudbray and Muddale are a little weird because of the fact that it says that it eats dirt in order to make mud, and Mudsdale is often used as part of construction to make a special kind of mud due to its saliva. I don't want to say that it eats mud. It would be an inorganic heterotroph then. Alternatively, it is a horse, and I believe in the game you can see it eating carrots at one point, so I feel like that's a safe assumption. Morello will nourish itself by sucking on tree roots, waking in the fall of night, and wandering off in search of a new tree once that tree doesn't provide it any more nutrition. It's evolution we can't say the same for, and that scares me about Shiinotic. Komala is born asleep and dies asleep, subsisting entirely off of the leaves that it has in its mouth, or eats, or whatever. It's a koala. Eucalyptus. Togedemaru doesn't say anything, but it is likely an herbivore because it's a mouse. It's one of the mouse Pokemon. Meanwhile, Drampa is very compassionate, and while it is angered, it could raise its entire surroundings to nothingness with its intense fiery breath, considering its basis in a type of deity that is based off of, like a deity of the mountain and so on, and its compassion. I'm going to say it's an herbivore. Grookey, Thwackey, and Rillaboom don't say anything about their diet data, although it is kind of cool to see that the sound waves that it produces creates revitalizing energy to the plants and flowers in the area. So if you're something that can just bang, 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 create plants and fruits for you to eat, and then just eat it, and you are a Primeape, which doesn't eat meat, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense for it to be an herbivore. Scorbunny, Raboot, Cinderace, it's a rabbit. Do I need to say more? Sobble will actually get its berries by shooting them down with bullets of water, and its aim is perfect. Squavit explicitly states that it eats berries non-stop and will try to carry them as much as it can, which it eventually evolves into Greedent, which will put so many berries into its big ol' stupid tail that it actually will drop them, and because it's too stupid, literally says it's slow-witted, it doesn't notice that it lost any berries along the way. Wooloo and Double don't have diet data, but they're sheep. I'm not saying any more for that one. Nimble and Lowkicks, they're based off of locusts, and they don't have any diet data. I almost said they were based off of crickets, and that would have been a mistake because crickets will be insectivores, slash omnivores more specifically. But locusts are actually herbivores. Pommy, Pomo, Pomots, they're based on marmots, but most other fighting types don't really eat meat. I thought they were based off of hamsters, honestly, considering the way that they look, but I don't know. You could argue that they are omnivores, but they look too cute. I know they have the eyes on the front, which is the sign of a predator as well, but Jigglypuff isn't a predator. So, neither is Bulbasaur. So, we can't rely on the eyes for this scientific stuff. Smoliv converts nutrients into oil, which it then stores in the fruit on its head. It can easily go a whole week without eating or drinking. That is really weird to me, that it does say that it actually does eat when its evolutions survive off of photosynthesis. So that's why Smoliv is here. And it is an olive pit. It is a seed, so maybe it needs a little bit more, as some other seed Pokemon like Sunkern that doesn't eat might need something. And finally, for the herbivore list, we hit Oranguru. It knows the forest inside and out, will help wounded Pokemon, treating it with medicinal herbs. It also will throw Pokeballs and give other Pokemon orders as it please, and then will actually go into a battle of wits against Lechonk like the nerd that it is. Another Pokemon based off of a primate of sorts, orangutan, which are herbivores. Hi, I had to do that thing called sleep, otherwise I would have actually gone insane. So we're going to move on now, though, despite the wardrobe change, with Inorganic Heterotrophs. Heterotrophs just derive their energy or nutrient needs from complex organic substances, whereas that's why I said Inorganic Heterotrophs. I put Pokemon in here because, once again, I don't think a soul, electricity, or entire rocks are considered organic complex substances. They are inorganic, or we don't know where to put a soul because we can't. How do you weigh a soul? Anywho, we're going to move on to the first one with Geodude, Graveler, Golem, and their Alolan forms all in this section. It's kind of based on the Graveler more than anything, as rocks are Graveler's favorite food. It just straight up says rocks are their favorite food. It also climbed the mountain all the way from base to summit and just eat rocks the whole way up. So that thing is getting muscle. Well, it's gaining mass. Although the only other difference towards their diet is that Alolan Graveler will actually eat Dravite, which makes really good sense considering Dravite is, I believe it's duomagnetic, which explains why it becomes a magnetic railgun Pokemon, basically. Magnemite, on the other hand, will actually attach itself to power lines to feed on electricity, and if there's ever an outage, just check your circuit breaker box, is what the Pokedex says. Magneton and Magnezone don't state anything different, so it could be assumed that they also absorb electricity, but considering the sheer size of Magnezone, that sounds terrifying for an electric bill. So Grimer is in this section, and so is Muck and their Alolan forms, even though they feast on Trubbish. Once again, I'm going to apply the same idea that if a Pokemon eats a plant Pokemon, it's not counted as a carnivore. Just like Grimer primarily feeds on polluted sludge in the area, or a Alolan form of Grimer will feed on any trash that's given to it, or if it doesn't eat, it'll go crazy and just start eating any man-made manufactured thing. That's what its primary food is, an inorganic substance. And I didn't want to put it into Detrivore because this thing eats couches. It will eat couches and chemicals, and Alolan form is an oil spill, and sludge is, depending on the definition of sludge and what environment, like when you look at sludge created in energy factories or anything like that, sometimes that is just like plant based matter. Sometimes that is just general organic compounds that are decomposing. Other times sludge can be carbon. It could just straight up be carbon and water, or all, like when you look at wastewater facilities, it could be a mix of anything. It could be so much stuff. So I don't want to call it a heterotroph. I don't want to call it a Detrivore. It fits best in Inorganic Heterotroph here. Feels really good to say some of that, because that's some stuff that I had to study in college. Onyx digs through the ground and it just absorbs any hard objects that come in contact with its body. Meanwhile, Steelix will just keep ingesting soil, and any of the iron that it ingests is what transforms its body to be harder than diamonds. You think you need a metal coat? I mean, yeah, that helps clearly, but you have a manufactured Steelix. Yours is worse than a natural Steelix. Always remember that, kids. Buy natural diamonds. Don't buy what will the ads do at this point? What are the ads gonna do? I'm curious. Tell me what the ads give you. Drowsy is literally the one Pokemon that you should expect to be in this section because it eats dreams. It literally states, if you think that you had a good dream but you can't remember it, a Drowsy is probably eating it. And the number of times that I wake up every single day without remembering what dream I had, but I know I had a good dream, that's terrifying. That's scary. I don't like that. Hypno will actively put people to sleep and feast on their dreams. It is a little scary because I believe there is an entry that does state that it will, if it really likes your dream, it'll take you away and just keep feasting on your dreams, but it never eats you. So that's why it's here. Then we have Voltorb and Electrode, which draw their power from trolleys of electric trains as one of the areas that they've been seen around doing. Electrode directly states that it eats electricity in the atmosphere and that it explodes all over the place from eating too much electricity. It's weird because it does say eating, and most electric type Pokemon don't really eat. They just store electricity and we just consider it eating. It's weird. I would like to think that electricity is like a nutrient to electric Pokemon, but that's still not the case for like Emolga in them. They probably just feel better. I kind of want to look into the science of that. I might have to look into the science of electric type Pokemon and their organs, because Pokemon talks a lot about fire organ, ice organ, electric organ, and what the heck, how do they function? Anywho, Coughing doesn't really say anything in particular about its diet. It just says that it mixes raw garbage to set off a chemical reaction in its body, so you could assume that it consumes raw garbage to do so, but it's wheezing that really tells us what's happening here, as it does say that it feeds on gases released by garbage, and apparently triplets do exist in the wild. I wish we could see that in Pokemon. That'd be kind of cool, just like how we see Tandemouses, you know, 3 family or 4 family form. But then with Galarian wheezing, we do know that they feed off of Trubbish's gases as well, not necessarily eating Trubbish itself, and that it consumes particles that contaminate the air. Instead of leaving droppings, it expels clean air. Honestly, a goated Pokemon we could use. That's one of the Pokemon we could use in real life. Rhyhorn, Rhyperior, Rhydon don't state anything about prey. They are rock type Pokemon. And honestly, they protect their mountain more than anything. I believe they also fight off Tyranitar, or at least try to, Rhyperior especially. So, Guardian of the Mountain doesn't really seem to eat. It also has blunt teeth, so it's probably a rock eater. Elekid, another electric type that's going to be in here that it's weird. It says it eats electricity, but it's still an organic creature, so again, I could see you arguing that it's an herbivore, but the Pokedex straight up does also say that it eats electricity from electrical outlets. Electabuzz will appear near large power plants to feed on strong electricity, but Electivire doesn't state anything. It might be an Autotroph though, because it seems to generate electricity constantly from its body. I believe 500,000 volts, so maybe possible Autotroph there. But these are going to be in this Inorganic Heterotroph section. Togepi is a great one. Honestly, if I could have a Pokemon in real life and it couldn't be my Gengar, because Gengar will probably kill me based on its Pokedex entries, then I would choose a Togepi. Because Togepi uses the feelings of compassion and pleasure exuded by people and Pokemon, storing up those happy feelings in its shell, then shares them out. So it uses that as its energy. Togetic and Togekiss don't state anything different, but they're also Pokemon that don't like to be around conflict, especially Togekiss, so we could assume the same thing. Mischievous is a Pokemon that startles people in the middle of the night in order to gather fear as its energy. Meanwhile, Mismagius states no new diet. It gets a little weird because Mismagius will knock on doors and possibly not freeze people. They'll knock on doors, maybe cast spells on people, curse you. They might make you like be the secret to falling in love and all this other stuff. Some of that can be hearsay. It's really weird, especially when you look at Pokemon Legends Arceus stuff, because sometimes the Legends Arceus stuff are just the legends of these Pokemon before they actually got to study them. And some of these entries are also, hey, this is legitimately what we've seen it do, not just hearsay. So those are grain of salt Pokedex entries. Slugma doesn't have blood in its body, it just has magma coursing through it, carrying all the essential nutrients and oxygen. If it stops moving, its body will cool and harden, which oddly enough is how it evolves into Magcargo, and Magcargo doesn't state anything new. They can dip themselves into magma, lava, whatever, in order to actually rejuvenate themselves, so they can't be far from it. So I may assume that they kind of absorb it into their body, or at least need it in order to survive. You could argue that they are an omnivore, or maybe, I mean, they maybe eat rocks. Let's be real. They live on a freaking volcano. What are they going to do? Eat a magmar? I don't think so. I don't think that, I mean, they could. This one's going to probably throw you off a little bit because Larvitar feeds on soil. That one we already know. Once it is eaten in a mountain, it will fall asleep so it can grow. Very much based off of the Tarrasque, which you could see in D&D, or generally creatures that live inside of the earth, or deep inside of the earth. Pupitar is trapped inside of its shell and it can't eat, but then Tyranitar likely is still the same as Larvitar, as it'll just fight opponents. It doesn't say that it does anything else. If it's not worthy, or if the opponent's not worthy, then it just ignores it and moves on. So it also knocks boulders down to make its nest. It's a weird Pokemon. You could argue that it's potentially an omnivore, but I'm gonna leave it here. Also, I know it's not in the do not eat section for Pupitar, but I think this is one of the scenarios where something is so high on the food chain that even if it doesn't eat, because it's included in what it is and the type of creature that it is, I don't think anyone's gonna eat it. It has an incredible power. It's like what we've talked about previously, where it's just a bad idea to go after a dragon, even if it's a baby dragon. I had the Joey Wheeler baby dragon go through my head. Ludicolo is a fun one because its body produces energy when it's hit by sound waves that are a cheerful rhythm. Ralts is a bit of an assumption, as its body does warm up when it feels and captures the warm feelings of people and Pokemon. Now, the reason why it's here is because usually when you consume something, you produce something, and unlike a lot of other Pokemon, such as our electric types, which will consume electricity and expout electricity after storing it, Ralts feels like a Pokemon that actually consumes emotions and is able to turn that into energy. Thus why it heats up. Also, Curlio does state that when exposed to the positive emotions of its trainer, it grows beautiful. It also controls psychokinetic powers with its brain. Developed brain, I'm sorry. It does dance in the sunlight, but I doubt that's photosynthesis. That's probably just the fact that it is, like, resembling a child. As such, it just likes to dance in the sunlight and play in the sun. That's a safe assumption. And there's no new info with Gardevoir, but if you try to argue the whole Gallade idea, Gallade is an honorable warrior that only uses the blades on its elbows in defense of something or someone. As such, I can safely state that even Gallade is not an omnivore, and that this thing could either be what it is in the section that we're in, or it's an herbivore. Shedden is plain and simple, as its body appears to be merely a hollow shell. It will steal the spirit of anyone peering into its hollow body from its back. Anybody, human, Pokemon, and it's not hard for it to just turn around. So either it's an inorganic heterotroph, or it just flat out doesn't eat. Now, Nosepass does state that it just spins and drills into the ground in a split second if it thinks it's in a jam. It moves less than an inch a year. It is a rock-type Pokemon, and considering what its future dex entry is, I'm going to put that Nosepass as an inorganic heterotroph here, and its evolution is a whole other ballgame that scares me. Sableye, you know it, you love it, it looks like Stitch, it just eats gems, baby. Although, it does consider Carbink its favorite food, so it does prey on Carbink. Aeron feeds on iron ore that it digs from the mountains and will occasionally cause trouble by eating bridges and rails, which is really funny. I imagine that it just takes one of these rails and starts chewing on it. It's like a noodle, just right into its mouth. The whole cartoon is in my head. I can feel it. Lairon will also fight Lairon will dig up iron ore as well. Lairon also tempers its body by actually drinking mineral spring water, so it's getting all of its other nutrients. And Aggron will dig tunnels, breaking through bedrock in order to seek iron for food. So all three of them fit perfectly into this section. Torkoal eats coal. Who would have guessed? Shuppet here feeds on dark emotions of sadness and hatred, which make it grow steadily stronger. Meanwhile, Bonnet generates energy for laying strong curses by sticking pins into its own body. So now we get on to Duskull, because we had Dusknoir, which we know does not eat. It is the Grim Reaper, and it carries souls across the Great River Styx, whatever you want to say. I don't care. Now, Duskull, in the dead of night, these Pokemon wander through towns in search of children, whose vital energy is a Duskull's favorite food. Don't let your kids play out at night in the Pokemon world. Snorunt literally just eats snow and ice in order to survive, but what's really cute about it is if a Snorunt visits your home, it's said to be like prosperous for many generations to come. And if you want to be nice to a Snorunt, you just take a nice little ball of ice and just leave it right outside of your doorstep, and it'll eat it and be all happy. Sometimes they just like actually will make home near you. So Snorunts are really cute. I'm saying this as if I have very personal experience with this. I wasn't in the Pokemon world. Don't look at me like that. So Frostlass. Frostlass is scary because it's the Yuki Onna, right? It's a woman that was going through the icy mountains, died in the cold, has regrets, so on and so forth. It will freeze people and Pokemon, anyone who's wandering on that mountain, and take them into its chilly den where they become decorations at first, but its favorite food is frozen souls. It does explicitly state that it will go after humans or Pokemon, so we have something that predates on predates. No, that's not the word. We have a predator to humans. Let's put it that way. Despite that, humans are really egotistical and like to put themselves above everything on the food chain because we have tools and everything, when in reality we'd probably just be somewhere in the middle of the food chain. The science is weird sometimes. So Matang gets scary because it will pursue prey at 60 miles per hour. I don't care if you're overseas, I don't know what it like for you overseas people, that's 96 kilometers an hour. 96. So 60 miles per hour, 96 kilometers per hour, zoom right off at that nose pass. Does not stand a chance. It is going to go through the skies to try and find prey. It does say prey, but it adores magnetic minerals. So assumedly, it's not going to go after you or me at least, because that would be scary, because once they do not let go. It is easily one of the scariest Pokemon. This thing, especially once it evolves into Metagross, has a supercomputer brain. It pins the prey to the ground under its massive body and then eats the helpless victim using the large mouth on its stomach. That is a direct quote from the Pokedex. Mega Metagross, when it can't win and knows it because it's a freaking supercomputer, it's stronger than any supercomputer we have. You know what it just decides to do? Gone. It digs its claws on its legs into the opponent and starts a countdown to a big explosion. It is done. It is the ultimate, I don't care if I can't win as long as you can't win. Sorry. Drifblim. I read it. Usually I read these right before I say them out loud, so at least I don't stumble on the words at all, because I tend to talk very fast, and sometimes I stumble on my words or mumble them, and I don't want to do that for a video that I'm trying to make quality for you. And Drifblim, I'm just going to read the dex entry. Stories go that it grabs the hands of small children and drags them away to the afterlife. It dislikes heavy children. That got a giggle out of me. I was a chubby kid. I was a big boy when I was younger, that's for sure. So I would have been safe, no problem. You know, there is no way that stupid ghost is carrying me off of the ground. I'm gonna grab it and pull it down is what I'm gonna do. Do you think they in the Pokemon world just decide to counteract Drifblim areas by just, you know, being Italian grandmothers and feeding them tons of spaghetti? Because I think that's a great thing. Anywho, doesn't say anything about Drifblim. Also, it doesn't say like. There's some speculation that it takes their souls and everything. It drags them to the afterlife. It's not like it's dropping them and eating them like some birds might do. So it's either here or it doesn't eat. Muna eats the dreams of people, and Musharna can create shapes of things from the dreams it's eaten, so that's very straightforward. Dwebble is really weird. I know it's a hermit crab, and hermit crabs will eat other hermit crabs. They will eat plants. They are omnivores to my understanding. So I put Dwebble here because it finds stone appealing and is a natural enemy of Roggenrola and Roly-Coly, so potentially they make homes in them. In addition, Crustle says that its thick claws are its greatest weapons. They're mighty enough to crack Rhyperior's carapace. So why would you go after a Rhyperior unless you're going to use it as food? That seems a bit excessive, so I'm going to keep Dwebble and Crustle here. Cofagrigus swallows people and turns them into mummies, but it does strictly state that it likes to eat gold nuggets. So I could understand if you put it as a carnivore, but there is a direct distinction right off the bat, because you can swallow something and still spit it back up. It's not digesting it. Think of, once again, when we look at mud bray, where it's eating mud to produce, or eating dirt in order to produce high quality mud, or Mudsdale for that matter. Joltik can be found clinging to other Pokemon, soaking up static electricity because it can't produce a charge on its own. It is also tied with a couple of other Pokemon, I think 6 or 7 other Pokemon, for the smallest Pokemon in existence. I think it's 0.1 meter or 0.01 meter. It's like this. Joltik is like this. Honestly, very fuzzy, cute little spider Pokemon. I'm not afraid of spiders, unless they're like the really big ones with really big legs that if they bite me, my entire leg falls off and suddenly my mother is afraid of meat. I don't know. Furthorn will actually scrape its spikes across the rocks and it absorbs the nutrients that it finds in the stone. Maybe that's the moss that we talked about earlier with this Pokemon, but with Ferroseed. But since it's scraping the stone itself, I'm going to assume that it's picking up iron. Litwick. I love Litwick. It's one of my favorites out there. It's so cute. I don't have a Litwick behind me, do I? I have a Whismur. I have a couple of the ones that I've talked about, and I didn't grab them. Heck, I even have Darumaka sitting right here. Litwick shines a light that absorbs the life energy of people and Pokemon, which only becomes the fuel that it burns. Lampent arrives near the moment of death and steals spirits from the body, often being near hospitals. And finally, Chandelure, being consumed in Chandelure's flames, burns up the spirit, leaving the body behind. So it doesn't eat you, it just eats you, your spirit. Whatever is inside of us and we can't measure, it just decides, there is no afterlife. You're with me now. That's what it does. I hate that. I hate that, and it's terrifying, and because it's such a cool Pokemon. One of my favorites from Gen 5 also. Honedge, Doublade, and Aegislash. We all know it. It's fairly straightforward. They are a spirit that inhabits a sword, and it will drink your life force. Doublade is a little different, as it'll alternate between offense and defense in order to bring down their prey. So there's a technicality. It has sharp teeth technically, so there's a potential that it is also a carnivore when it's Doublade. But then Aegislash goes back to manipulate people and Pokemon in order to control them. And kings were found, with Aegislash in their company, passed away. So their life force was likely taken based on their entries. So I'm going to just keep all 3 here. Klefki lived in the mines and absorbed all of its nutrients that it liked from those mines. And once that became scarcer, it started to become a key, loving keys, and it actually absorbs the metal ions from them. So that's why Klefki is here. Bergmine and Avalugg don't have any diet data, but I will argue that they eat ice and snow. But I understand if you would argue that they're carnivores, as they float on water often, and considering most things in icy areas are just carnivores because there's no freaking plants to eat, I get it. Meteor eats the dust in the atmosphere, and the composition of the dust determines the color of its core. So throw up a bunch of neon and you're probably going to get yourself a green one. Turtonator lives in volcanoes and eats sulfur and other minerals. The materials from its food it eats forms the basis for its explosive shell, and poop for that matter. Roly-Coly. We finally get to Roly-Coly, whereas Gigalith and its other form that I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now, were do not eat. Roly-Coly, on the other hand, though, burns coal in order to sustain it. So it's rolling around like Unicycle, even on rough, rocky terrain, and doing its own thing, eating coal, living its life, until eventually it just produces coal, I suppose. Toxel and Toxtricity, they're weird. You could argue that they are filter feeders instead of inorganic heterotrophs. Reason for this is that they drink dirty water and the poisonous liquid is harmless to Toxel. Meanwhile, Toxtricity chugs stagnant water to absorb any toxins it might contain. So it's either absorbing the toxins, I mean, it straight up says that's what it's doing, but you could argue that it is going after any other microbacteria that exists in it. Problem with that is, if the water is super toxic, you're not going to have even snails living near it. It becomes uninhabitable, which is a big theme of Galar in some of its areas. So it's absorbing toxins, inorganic heterotroph. Sinisty and Poltegeist absorb the life force of those who drink it, and they wait patiently, opportunities being fleeting, because it tastes so bad that it just gets spat out immediately. What's really funny though, when it becomes Poltegeist, there are gourmets who have no fear of danger that drink Poltegeist tea day after day. So they are just playing with the devil at that point. They're just asking for it. And Poltegeist is just waiting and saying, okay, yeah, go for it. Impidimp is said to thrive off of negative energy. That's why it's a very prankster, trickster Pokemon. Its evolution also is popular with people with gloomy thoughts, and also flat out says that it absorbs negative emotions and turns them into energy. Meanwhile, there's no new information on Grimmsnarl. The more sweet aromas that Milcery absorbs, the more its body swells, and it'll deflate when that energy level drops. So it's surviving off of sweet aromas. It'll also tackle foes and cover them in cream. And once they are blinded or astonished by deliciousness, Milcery flees. The reason I bring that in there is because it is very likely that Pokemon of all types, and maybe even humans, would actively attack this Pokemon for its sweetness. And Alcremie states that desserts that Alcremie have decorated with their cream have a rich, sweet flavor and bring happiness to all who eat them. So, like, it makes really good sense that it ends up being this wedding cake-esque Gigantamax, and I think that's really cute. Snob says it eats snow piles that pile up on the ground. The more snow it eats, the bigger and more impressive the spikes on its back grow. Frostmoth, on the other hand, shows no mercy to any who desecrate fields and mountains, and will fly on icy wings, causing a blizzard to chase offenders away. So it doesn't eat them. So either Frostmoth doesn't eat, considering what we talked about moths previously, or it continues to eat snow and ice. Indeedee, through its horns, can pick up on the emotions of creatures around it. Positive emotions are the source of its strength. Qfence directly states that it carves off chunks of hard rocks to eat and is very docile, helps people with physical labor. There's no new additional information on Caporaja, but considering both are also elephants, it's a safe assumption. Duraludon, though, I had to actually base on Archaludon or Archaludon. Archaludon. If you say Archaludon, something is wrong with you. But it digs holes on the mountain searching for food. It's so durable that being caught in a cave-in won't phase it. So, considering it's a steel type, steel dragon, I'm going to say that it eats iron. I could understand that it doesn't, or that you would argue that it's a carnivore. Now, Fido and Doxpun. It is a fairy-type Pokemon. It says no diet data, and despite being a dog, they are made of bread/yeast. And yeast eats sugar to grow, and this thing has yeast breath that is used in bakeries. So it lives in a bakery, it exists in a bakery, and if you heat up Doxpun, it actually smells really good, which is really weird, and I don't know how I feel about that. And it's another dog that I said wouldn't be a non-omnivorous dog, but I clearly lied to you because science. Tadbulb is another one that it's weird. I mean, you could see it specifically being an herbivore. Maybe its evolution stays an herbivore. It's hard to say. Tadbulb floats using electricity stored in his body. And when there's thunderclouds, it does float higher off of the ground, and Bellybolt doesn't say anything else. They are a tadpole and frog, so do with that as you will. They are an electric type. They exist. I mean, if you slap Bellybolt on the stomach, it just ends up generating more electricity. So you could also say that it's potentially an Autotroph. I don't know. This is one Pokemon that I was just like, why? Why are you so complicated? You look so simple, but you're so complicated. You and your fake eyes. Bramblin, I did have to base off of Brambleghast, because Brambleghast will open the branches of its head to envelop prey, and once it absorbs all the life energy it needs, it expels the prey and discards it. Now, I get it. You might be arguing, well, Krillix, what if that's its blood? Well, no, because we have Golbats early on that directly states it insanguinates. There's your teaser for the carnivores. Although I will also state that on rare occasions, mass outbreaks of bramble gas will occur and they will bury an entire town. So either that means literally and they're absorbing everybody's life force and the whole town becomes a ghost town, which explains why you see the floating right across, or nothing, you know what I mean? Maybe it literally buries an entire town because, it's like a stampede. Lion King, dad, bye. There goes the antelope. Buffalo. They were water buffalo. I don't know. Vroom specifically states that this Pokemon clings to rocks and converts the minerals within into energy to fuel its activities. Meanwhile, Revavroom creates a gas out of poison and minerals from those rocks, detonating the gas in its cylinders to generate energy. Orthworm maintains its metal body by consuming iron from the soil. Glimmer absorbs nutrients from the cave walls, and the petals are made from crystallized poison. There's no new data on Glimmora, although they're both similar to the terastallization crystals or terra crystals that exist in the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games. Citadel loves the minerals found in snow and ice, and there's no other data on Cetitan. Frigibax absorbs heat through its dorsal fin and converts the heat into ice energy. The higher the temperature, the more energy that Frigibax stores. There's no additional information on Arctibax or Baxcalibur. Now, if you've played the games, one thing that you're probably going to be saying right now and asking me is, well, doesn't it say that it fights with other Pokemon such as like Bergmite or anything like that? I thought so. I could have sworn I read something that said that, but at the same time, if it eats Bergmite and Avalugg, its helmet is made of ice, but it's pretty much an ice Pokemon. We could put it as a carnivore, I guess, or it could stay here an inorganic heterotroph, so that one's a toss-up. Gimmighoul walks around carrying a coin on its back, or at least the one that's roaming around, and survives by draining the life force from humans who try to pick up its coin. How does it feel to know that you picked 1,000 coins and were its prey? Poltergeist also sprinkles some of its powdery body onto food and drains the life force from those who so much as lick it. Sinistcha pretends to be tea, trying to fool people into drinking it so it can drain their life force. Its ruse is generally unsuccessful, very much like its counterpart. And finally, we end this section with Galarian Corsola, which states that sudden climate change wiped out this ancient kind of Corsola. This Pokemon absorbs others' life force through its branches. Corsola states nothing new, although if you touch its coral, it does end up turning you to stone, so don't touchy. No touchy. Very bad idea. It doesn't say anything about it actually eating anything else, and it's very sad. It's one of my favorite regional variants because it's based on a very sad thing, which is bleaching of coral, something that happens in real life. Go save the oceans. The temperatures rising increase ocean rising. I won't go on a big rant about that. I like nature. Welcome to Insectivores, the Pokemon that just eat insects. I wanted to have this separate, unlike other Pokemon that are like, oh, we just eat fish. Why didn't you separate that also? I feel like there's a proper distinction between bug meat and then the rest of meat that exists. I know there's a lot of other differences that I should have in mind, but I wanted to separate the Insectivores so that way there was a little bit more of a proper food chain pyramid thing going on. To start out, we have Generation 1, Pidgey, which does not like to fight, hides in tall grass and so on, foraging for food such as small bugs. Spearow eat bugs in grassy areas, and farmers whose fields are troubled by bug Pokemon appreciate Spearow for its vigorous appetite and look after it, actually. Which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting that to be the case for Pidgey, because Pidgey seems friendlier than Spearow, and it's always kind of been shown that way. So that's a fun little tidbit of information in the Pokemon world. Meanwhile, its evolution, Fearow is recognized by its long neck and elongated beak. They are conveniently shaped for catching prey in soil or water. Definitely moves its long and skinny beak to pluck prey. I get the water portion of it. It is likely a carnivore. You could throw that into that section. It's just that it says prey in the soil. So very much, it's like a heron. You know what I mean? It's like a heron. So it could rely primarily on bugs. It could go after fish more often. I figured that I would leave it here. Sandshrew directly states that it digs holes to catch bug-type Pokemon, and its alolan form could still be an insectivore, as bugs could dig deep under the ground and would still be alive under the permafrost, which we know that alolan Sandshrew has claws that can dig very easily under it, because that's how it hides from predators as well. The fluid that oozes from Gloom's mouth is actually a nectar that is used to attract prey. It is based off of the Rafflesia flower, and even though the actual Rafflesia flower does not eat anything, it's not a carnivorous flower actually. I thought it was. Big old flower. Nope, doesn't eat, I mean, it obviously doesn't eat people, but it doesn't eat animals, doesn't eat bugs, so on and so forth. It's just there and it stinks. Despite that, we can safely say that Gloom, I mean, it says it eats prey, will go after insects. Vileplume has the world's largest petals that are used to attract prey and then douses them with toxic spores. Once they're immobilized, it catches and devours them. I always thought the Vileplume was kind of cool and that the Rafflesia flower is amazing, and that's scary. I don't like that. I don't want to touch this flower now, and I want to stay really far away. Venonat lives in the shadows of tall trees where it eats bugs, and it's attracted by light at night. It's exactly what you'd expect. Its evolution Venomoth are nocturnal, and their prey are insects that gather around streetlights attracted by light in the darkness. That makes me wonder if Venomoth actually might eat Venonats, and if Venonats are super common. Bellsprout, a carnivorous Pokemon that traps and eats bugs. It uses its root feet to soak up needed moisture. Lickitung I did not expect to be an insectivore though. Bug Pokemon are Lickitung's main food source. This Pokemon paralyzes its prey with a lick from its long tongue that swallows the prey whole. Licky Licky doesn't really state anything different. It can extend its tongue to over 10 times its height, and that its saliva does contain corrosive elements. What's scary about it is that these Pokemon just like to lick things, so don't let it lick you, otherwise you're gone. It's over. There's no coming back. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Horsey states that it's known to shoot down flying bugs with precision blasts of ink from the surface of the water. Meanwhile, Yanma will use its large eyes to scan 360 degrees, looking in all directions to seek out insects as its prey. Yanmega isn't in here because I'm terrified of it and I know what it can do, so we'll talk about Yanmega later. Pineco hangs and waits for flying insect prey to come near and doesn't move about much on its own. It waits for these bug Pokemon prey to come by, and its favorite is Cutiefly, at least in Alola. So there goes your first Cutiefly entry of it not being in the OG Pokedex, or not being in the Cutiefly Pokedex, but it's in Pineco's. Fortress, on the other hand, in the moment that it gulps down its prey, the inside of its shell is exposed, but to this day, no one has ever seen that sight. Why haven't we cracked this thing open? Why haven't we seen this thing pass away? We crack it open and properly dissect some of these Pokemon. I get why we don't do it for Mimikyu. Mimikyu probably doesn't die. But on the other hand, we have freaking Fortress. Just do it. Be a scientist. Tailo, on the other hand, is young. It only has just left its nest. As a result, it sometimes becomes lonesome and cries at night, but it does feed on Wurmple that live in forests. Its evolution, though, it circles the sky in search of prey. When it spots one, it dives steeply to catch the prey. Considering it's based off of swallows, sorry. See, the Pokemon and the actual animal are very similar in their name, and they did that a lot early on, and they still kind of do that. That's the way the Pokemon does it. It would probably still just eat insects. If you want to argue that it's a carnivore, go for it. Surskit appears as if it is skating on water, and it draws prey with its sweet scent from the tip of its head. Now, there is a chance that it actually eats Dewpider if they come into contact with each other. As it states, it lives in ponds and marshes that feature lots of plant life. It often fights with Dewpider, whose habitat and diet are similar. So at the very least, we can say that Dewpider's an insectivore when we get to them. Or can we? There's no new info on Masquerain, and we move on to Volbeat and Illumis, who has no diet data. But because they're based off of lightning bugs or light bugs or whatever you want to call them, those actually eat slugs, worms, and snails, which I wasn't aware of. Starly flock around mountains and fields chasing after bug Pokemon. Their singing is noisy and annoying, and that's really sad to always see a Pokedex that's just like, hey, shut up! Staravia, though, they fly around forests and fields in search of bug Pokemon, moving together in huge flocks. Pocket, this is not a pocket. I'm just reaching through the hole in my lab coat. This is a legit lab coat, by the way. Did I buy this recently? No. I just realized I had a lab coat sitting in my back room from when I worked on lab stuff, and I realized I should be using it. Why not? Why aren't I? Woobat emits ultrasonic waves as it flies about, searching for its prey, which are bug Pokemon stated directly by the Pokedex, and there's no other data on Swoobat. Oh, I can feel it. I can feel the insanity taking over me. Anywho, Drillbur. It brings its claws together and whirls around at high speed before rushing towards its prey. It's a digger, using its claws to burrow through the ground, causing damage to vegetable crops, so farmers have little love for it. Now, it doesn't state anything other than the fact that it does go after prey, but moles are insectivores, and there's no extra data on Excadrill. And to close out insectivores, we have Heatmore, where Durant is its prey. Durant is a bug steel type bug insectivore. It's based off of an anteater. Nice and simple. So I realized my shirt was inside out for the entirety of the last section or so, and I realized that my voice mod was on for about 8 minutes of the Omnivore section that we're currently in. We've hit the Omnivores! We have talked about over 553 Pokemon at this point! I am going crazy for sure. I have tea now, though, so if you were wondering about my hoarse throat, I have tea right in front of me to start drinking, and I did take a break, so... How do you feel about the standing format of this? Should I be standing? Do you like the movement and energy? Is that what we like? Or should I be sitting for a more consistent, positioning? I don't know. But if you've made it this long, I want to know your opinions. Anywho, we're going to move on as we've now made it on to Rattata. Rattata eats everything. Wherever food's available, it settles down and produces offspring. It's a mouse rat thing. Joey the 1% at the top. You know how it is. Anywho, Alolan Rattata, though, will only eat fresh food, though, and eradicate. Its hind feet are webbed and will hunt in rivers for prey, whereas Alolan Eradicate will still only want fresh food. So they're a little bit of a stickler, but still an omnivore. As we hit Psyduck and Golduck, there's no dex info on them, but they are ducks. So, some ducks do eat fish, and they will eat bugs and grass, plants, things. Mankey and Primeape is in this section because despite the fact that primates typically do not eat meat, because Primeape, Mankey do find themselves to be very aggressive Pokemon that just constantly go on rage, I doubt they would think much about what they eat, when they eat, and as long as they can fuel their bodies for more damage, that's all that they care about, considering how much muscle that they hold in their body. Annihilape is here, but could probably be put into the do not eat section. It doesn't say anything in its Pokedex, but just on the off chance that it does eat something, we're leaving it here considering the evolutionary line. We have Growlithe, Arcanine, and their Hisuian forms. Now, you could argue that they don't attack anything because of, their noble, mentality. So potentially herbivores, but they are dogs. They are canines. And since they are based off of wild dogs, now that we have the Hisuian form, we're gonna say they have to be omnivores for sure. Machop is another exception to the fighting type Pokemon rule, as it likes food that's highly nutritious because its instincts drive it to build muscle efficiently. As such, you would expect it to eat stuff like chicken or fish at the very least in order to build muscle faster, because the only alternative to that is eating a ton of beans or eating a ton of potatoes, which do provide a lot of muscle growth. But if you want to be efficient about it, while being lean as they are, they're probably going to eat nuts for their fats, fish, maybe high-fat berries here and there, in addition to chicken. Weepinbell states that if its prey is larger than its mouth, it slices up the victim with sharp leaves and eats every morsel. So when it's hungry, it swallows anything that moves. Its hapless prey is dissolved by strong acids. Then when it evolves into Victreebel, it attracts prey with sweet-smelling honey. It includes bugs, naturally, and even large animals on occasion. Looking at Galarian Slowpoke, I say that it's an omnivore because the scent of the spice emanating from its tail ensures its fishing catches are rather lacking, and we already know that they have a large diet subsisting of Galarica seeds, which is what makes regular Slowpoke and Galarian Slowpoke different. Doduo and Dodrio don't have anything in their dex entries, but since they are likely based off of the dodo, and scientific studies have stated that there's the possibility that dodos ate fish, we know that they ate other fruits and plants, and because of their rounded beak, so we could safely say that they could be omnivores. Goldeen is based on the fantail goldfish, which are omnivores, and Seaking nor Goldeen have anything about their diets in their Pokedex. Flareon is a very direct one, as it says when it catches prey or finds berries, it breathes fire on them until they're well done and then gobbles them up. If you're not a Pokemon fan and you don't know about Munchlax and Snorlax somehow, you know what, I can forgive you, but if you're wondering what Munchlax and Snorlax eat, athlete, what's going on. But you might not know something about Snorlax. First, with Munchlax, anything that looks edible, Munchlax will go on and swallow whole. Its stomach is tough enough to handle it even if the food has gone rotten. Meanwhile, Snorlax's stomach is so strong that it could just eat Muck's poison, and it's just like a little bit of spice. Dragonair and Dragonite I put here despite the fact that Dragonite is a Pokemon that rescues people or Pokemon that are drowning. It doesn't say anything about fish Pokemon or other seafaring Pokemon. It does fly so much over the water. It needs something to fuel it, and you're not going to find a ton of plants in that much abundance. Dragonite is a big boy, and even if that's all muscle, it needs a lot of calories. Sentret doesn't have anything, but if we base it off of Furret, it states that it's quick at hunting Rattata. And considering that it's based off of meerkats and ferrets, we don't need to put them into carnivore. We can't set them as omnivore.
Hey, I drink my tea. I drink the tea, I drink it. The tea is hot, oh no.
Azrael's tail is filled with nutrients necessary for growth, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to eat. Again, Flintstones vitamins. You can't just go downing a pack of those. You will vomit rainbows. Marilla's oil-filled tail acts much like a life preserver, and it is most likely beneath the water, feeding on aquatic plants. When fishing for food, though, at the edge of a fast-running stream, it wraps its tail around the trunk of a tree. Finally, Azumarill's long ears are indispensable sensors, allowing it to identify what kinds of prey are around in rough and fast-running rivers. For Wooper and Paldean Wooper, we actually base it off of Quagsire, which hunts for food by leaving its mouth wide open in the water and waiting for its prey to blunder in unaware. It doesn't really move, so it doesn't get very hungry, but it's just really funny. I'm going to sit right here, and if you fall into my stomach, it's your fault. Remember that. Clodsire doesn't state anything different. Murkrow doesn't state anything, but regular crows are omnivores, and there's nothing additional in terms of information for Honchkrow. Dunsparce's Pokedex doesn't state anything, but it is a Tsuchinoko, or based off of the Tsuchinokos, which are omnivorous, and the Dunsparce doesn't state anything either. I feel like I'm a broken record saying that the Pokedex doesn't state anything, but Snubbull and Gramble don't state anything about the Pokedex, but they're also based off of a Bulldog, which is omnivorous. It's a dog. What do you want from me, a canine? Quillfish and Hisuian Quillfish. With Hisuian Quillfish, it absorbs toxins from the food it eats. The distinct purple spikes on its body are evidence of its potent poison. Now, when we look at pufferfish, they eat invertebrates. They eat algae, clams, mussels, shellfish, and they potentially, which is really interesting, I didn't realize this, create their toxins from the things that they eat. So just like Quillfish or Hisuian Quillfish, they actually do that. That's really cool, and it's again, it all forms from the bacteria, because when bacteria die, they release like all the nutrients they had, but because they're bacteria and how they're formed and everything else about them, they just release all their bacteria poop into everything, and that's probably what's getting turned into poison, which is crazy. Animals are awesome. Overquill, on the other hand, its lance-like spikes and savage temperament have earned it the nickname Sea Fiend. It slurps up poison and nourishes itself, so maybe it's an inorganic heterotroph. It's a weird one. Delibird, blessed be the Pokedex, states directly that it is omnivorous. Sometimes it gives those people that it saves that stranded on the mountain bug Pokemon to eat. Skarmory, we had to take a few steps here or there. The pointed feathers of these Pokemon are sharper than swords. Skarmory and Corviknight fight viciously over territory. They're likely based on animals such as condors, cranes, and more, so they're arguably an omnivore or a detrivore. Typically, detrivores are also opportunistic with a combat ability. Like Skarmory, I doubt it would actually be a detrivore, though. It's very apex predator. Its wings and feathers were actually used as swords by people in the past. So when you take all these into account and just how powerful it is, it's not bottom tier. It's really high up there. So I doubt it would be a detrivore. It at least needs to be an omnivore or a carnivore. Trico is placed here because of Sceptile primarily. As it makes its nest in a giant tree in the forest, it ferociously guards against anything nearing its territory. It is said to be the protectors of forests trees. We can argue it's the same diet, as the leaves growing out of Grovile's body are convenient for camouflaging it from enemies in the forest. This Pokemon is a master at climbing trees and jungles, and when we actually look at Sceptile, it says It agilely flits through the jungle and uses the sharp-edged leaves on its arms to cut down its prey. Torchic doesn't have a diet stated, but we're arguing it's an omnivore because it's a chicken. Same thing goes for Combuskin and Blaziken. Mudkip, it's based off of catfish, mud skippers, and so on, which they all eat plants, bugs, and general seafood. There's no diet stated for it, Marshtomp, or Swampert, though. Poochyena is an omnivore. It will eat anything. A distinguishing feature is how large its fangs are compared to its body. Mightyena chases down prey in a pack of around 10, defeating the foes with coordinated teamwork. Zigzagoon and Galarian Zigzagoon are based on Lanoon, which charges prey at speeds of over 60 miles per hour. Because it can only run in straight lines, it often fails. I just imagine running straight into a wall and then just shaking it off and running again and completely missing. Galarian Lanoon uses explosive speed and razor sharp claws to hunt down prey. And then Obstagoon doesn't have any new info, but Obstagoon is brought into reality because it survived in such a harsh environment for so long and worked its way to the top. So it is one of those apex predators in the area, or apex omnivore, whatever, it's up there. So Lotad and Lombre, I know we had placed Ludicolo where it was, but with these two, they live in lakes that have good water quality, and Lombre will only like step out of the water in order to scare people, but it will feed on aquatic moss that grows on the rocks in the riverbed. So, I mean, moss isn't necessarily indicative of a healthy river stream environment. It's good because it means that there's like oxygen, but too much moss, too little moss, what doesn't tell us anything. So maybe it's an omnivore, maybe it's partially a filter feeder, so it goes here. Makuhita is tenacious and will keep getting up and attacking its foe no matter how many times it's knocked down. It stores energy in its body for evolving, and it practices its slaps by repeatedly slapping tree chunks, which if it slaps an Alolan Executor, it just gets flung away. It's a very big boy. Yet another exception. Honestly, I don't realize how many exceptions there are. I've gone through 1,025 of these, and I keep saying there's exceptions. I should stop saying certain things like that. Either way, it's a very big boy. It's got to eat good. The main reason that it's put into omnivore, though, is that there's a rumor of a traditional recipe for stew that trainers can use to raise strong Makuhita. So it likely eats a nice mixture of, you know, all your foods. Hariyama, although they enjoy comparing their strength, they're also kind. They value etiquette, praising opponents they battle. Electrike and Menatrick, no diet in the Pokedex, but they're based off dogs. Gulpin, virtually all of Gulpin's body is in its stomach. Or, well, is its stomach, because as a result, it can swallow anything its own size. This Pokemon's stomach contains a special fluid that digests anything. When Swalot finds prey, it spurts out a hideously toxic fluid from its pores and sprays the target. Once the prey has weakened, this Pokemon gulps it down whole with its cavernous mouth. Noodle and Camerupt, they're extremely dull-witted and don't really notice how, you know, when they get hit, but they also can't stand hunger for even a second. There's no new data on Camerupt itself, but because they're based on camels, if forced by hunger, a camel will eat fish, meat, skin, and even bones. Typically, I wouldn't go off of the non-primary diet because anything can be pushed to the brink and be forced to eat anything, but since Numel strictly says that it can't stand hunger for even a second, we can safely assume that it's an omnivore then. Spindo, which is based on a panda, they primarily eat bamboo, but they will eat fish and small mammals. Corphish catches prey with its sharp claws. It has no likes or dislikes when it comes to food. It will eat anything. And it also has no trouble living in filthy water. It also will never release prey if it actually ends up catching it, adapts well to its environment, but, Feebas and Corphish are about the only Pokemon to live in stagnant ditches, but Feebas are typically ignored. As such, Feebas is strictly not eaten by Corphish, and Crawdaunt just likes to battle and either will battle everything in the area in its territory or throw them out. Speaking of Feebas, that's the next one on the list, as it eats anything, so it can even live in polluted streams and lakes. No one pays any attention to it. Whereas when we look at Melodic, it doesn't say anything about a new diet, it just soothes people's minds and hearts. So we're just gonna assume it's the same. This is probably the most interesting Pokemon in terms of diet to me, because we've seen Dusknoir not eat anything. We've seen Duskull eat souls, but then Dusclops absorbs anything, however large the object may be. It hypnotizes its foe by waving its hands in a macabre manner and by bringing its single eye to bear. The hypnotized foe is made to do Dusclops' bidding. So you go from I eat souls to I eat everything and anything I can absorb to I don't need to eat anything and I'm the Grim Reaper. Bagon, I have to base it on future Dex entries, which Salamence states it flies around on its wings, which have grown in at last. It gushes hot flames, burning up the fields it passes over. Mega Salamence will slice anything in its path in two, and the Mega Evolution fuels its brutality, and it's been dubbed the Blood-Soaked Crescent. Classic dragon on this case, so I am going to say it's an omnivore. Again, if you want to, we could have put Charizard around this area as well. With Kricketot and Cricketune, there's no data on their diet, but crickets are omnivores. Crocodiles was resurrected and it downs prey with headbutts. It snaps trees by headbutting them and feeds on the ripe berries, and I wouldn't be surprised if they ate each other. Rampardos will also still do the same thing, and as we talked about earlier, it fought with Bastiodon and would consistently fight with them. Whoever lost, well, let's be real, the Bastiodon isn't eating, it's a herbivore, so the Cranidos/Rampardos is going to have its meal. But what's really interesting, it lived in the jungles around 100 million years ago. It used its skillful headbutts to combat Aerodactyl. So this thing not only ate Bastiodon, but it also ate Aerodactyl. Glamio hides its spiteful tendency, hooking its claws into the nose of its trainer if it isn't fed. It's your average house cat, and there's no other data on Perugly. Stunky is based on Skuntank's entry and the skunk diet, because Skuntank reserves stinky fluid that it shoots from its tail during battle, and as the diet varies, so does the stench of its fluid. And skunks are omnivores. Tepig definitely dodges its foes while shooting fireballs from its nose. It roasts berries before eating them. It's also a ravenous glutton and able to find food with its sense of smell before cooking it to a crisp and eating it. There's no additional data on Pignite and Embor, and looking at boars and pigs, yeah, I think you get the idea here. Hisu and Samurott goes here though. Due to its nature, I will argue that it is an omnivore more than anything. It is Heart of Heart and Deft of Blade. It is a dark type Pokemon, underhanded, ruthless Pokemon that has more sharp points than your average mall sword kiosk. This thing is an omnivore. Patrat uses food stored in its cheek pouches that it can keep for days. It's an arguable omnivore or insectivore, depending on how you feel today or at this moment, I don't know, due to meerkat origins. Watchhog also states that it will speak the seeds of berries stored in their cheek pouches. Lillipup is actually based on the Herdier entry, which states that it is very smart and friendly, so much so that there's a theory that Herdier was the first Pokemon to partner with people. If you don't know about the first 13, 14 dogs that ever existed, they are the dogs that all dogs come from. I've talked about this in the explaining every single regional variant video that I have, where like Chihuahuas didn't exist. We made Chihuahuas, just like we made bovine cow. I just said cow twice. That's like saying chai tea. You get the reference. Either way, it had to have eaten meat first. It's a dog, it's a canine, you know, whatever, so on and so forth. There's no other new data on Stoutland though. Heat of, where people go, these Pokemon follow. If you're scattering food for them, be careful. Several hundred of them may gather at once. So yeah, they're the rats of the sky. Tranquilon Pheasant, no new data. Papatoad states that it uses its long sticky tongue to capture prey, and Seismitoad doesn't say anything else. Frogs are typically omnivorous. Archean is said to be the ancestor of bird Pokemon. It lived in treetops eating berries and bug Pokemon, whereas Archeops are intelligent and will cooperate to catch prey. From the ground, they use a running start to take flight. Very sharp teeth. I doubt that they just ate bug Pokemon, and if it's intelligent, it is likely going to be the type of creature that will raise its young, especially considering it is a bird Pokemon, so it likely fed Archean whatever it could get. Zorua, Zoroark, and their Hisuian variants. With Zorua, it states that it sometimes transforms into a person and goes into cities to search for food. When it does this, it usually takes the form of a child. Hisuian Zorua is a once departed soul returned to life in Hisui. It derives power from resentment, which rises as energy atop its head and takes the form of foes. In this way, Zorua vents lingering malice. Now, there's no new data on the Zoroarks, but if we go off of all of this, we can at least state that it will eat whatever it's given when it transforms into other people. The reason why the Hisuian forms are still here is because they're still normal ghost types. They seem to still need energy, and while it has it and generates it, it vents it out. It doesn't try to consume it. Carablast spits liquid from its mouth to melt through Shelmet's shell, and Carablast doesn't eat the shell. It only eats the contents. We can base that off of the fact that it is also a ground beetle, which eats insects and plants. And no other data on Escavalier. Rufflet crushes berries with their talons. They bravely stand up to any opponent, no matter how strong it is. It also states in a Pokedex that it is a carnivore at heart, even though it consumes berries. Say what you want, Pokedex. It is an omnivore. Dino, lacking sight, is unaware of its surroundings, so it bumps into things and eats anything that moves. Zweilous, after it has eaten all the food in a territory, moves to another area. And Hydreigon just consume and destroy everything. Froakie, Frogadier, Greninja, there's no diet data, but they're frogs. We've talked about this. Frou-Frou is a dog. Omnivorous. Gumi actually had it based off of the fact that Sliggoo states it has trouble drawing a line between friends and food. It will calmly try to melt and eat even those it gets along with. Can you imagine going for a hug with this thing or trying to pet it and you just, you're gone. You're gone. You're gone. Your kids are gone. Your dogs are gone. Your friends are gone. Your house is gone. It's eating everything. And now it evolves into Goodra, which doesn't have any additional information, nor does its Hisuian variants. I mean, at least with Goodra, it'll just cover you in the sticky slime and you won't get dissolved by it, assumedly, based on what its Pokédex says, at least. Noivern fly around on moonless nights and attack careless prey. Nothing could beat them in a battle in dark. And despite its violent disposition, if you give it some fruit, some ripe fruit, it'll calm down and be super tame. Now, here's a really interesting thing. In the dark, even Hydreigon are terrified of this Pokemon, but in the light, Noivern is the one that avoids battle. So, I know Noivern is way down here on this list. I want you to know that despite the fact of how they're organized, just for my sake, your sake, and everyone else's sake, Noivern would be on this same level of Hydreigon. The only issue is, if there are multiple Hydreigon, there might be an issue. But there's likely multiple Noivern, and you get into semantics, and it becomes a mess. So, for the sake of clarity and simplicity, we are saying Noivern belongs here, but could take on everything that is below Hydreigon. It just doesn't naturally hunt them. Vikavolt is said to actually shoot down bird Pokemon with its electromagnetic beams. It can be an aggressive Pokemon, so that's why it's here. Pessimium uses berries as its weapons and is also a staple of its diet. They will go hunting as a hunting party with 10 members, which they then share the spoils of with the rest of the group. And since it's based off of a lemur, lemurs do also eat insects. Golisopod, easily one of the sickest sun and moon Pokemon out there. It's a Ronin Poli. I love it. I love it. It's so cool. It battles skillfully with its 6 arms, but spends most of its time peacefully meditating in caves deep beneath the sea. They live in sunken ships or in holes in the seabed. When Golisopod and Grapplock battle, the loser becomes the winner's meal. Rookity, jumping nimbly about, this small-bodied Pokemon takes advantage of even the slightest opportunity to disorient larger opponents. There's no other data on Corvisquire or Corviknight when it comes to prey. Ravens are omnivores, and I know they're ravens, but based on their attitude, I would also state that they're probably based on general blackbirds, like the red-winged blackbird, which is a very small but very aggressive animal. I almost called it a Pokemon. I'm mixing up the worlds. Very aggressive animal that will attack by itself or in groups hawks and a larger osprey until they get, taken down. Nickit is aided by the soft pads on its feet to sneak around, and it just raids food stores of other Pokemon, surviving off of the ill-gotten gains. And its evolution will do the same thing, basically, as it steals food and eggs, Boltund being its natural enemy. Choodle, apparently the itch of its teething impels it to snap its jaws at anything in front of it. Dreadnought also can chew through steel rods and is a very aggressive Pokemon that chomps down on unfortunate prey. Yamper do be a dog though, same as Boltund. Appletun. Appletun going here is what shocked me. Its body is covered in sweet nectar and the skin on its back is especially yummy. Children used to have it as a snack, which I don't know when children would stop eating it. I don't know if it grows its back, but it feeds mainly on sweet apples. It will also eat small bug Pokemon that are attracted by its sweet nectar. When some Lechonk come along, we've already talked about the fact that it drives them away. And then there's no new data on Flapple, Dipplin, or Hydrapple, but considering that Flapple can't attract Pokemon because it has a sour taste, unless there are Pokemon that like sour, and then Dipplin and Hydrapple definitely look more aggressive and have more mouths to feed overall, it's safe to put them here. Tandemaus and Mousehold are mice. Let's just treat them like Rattata, please. And then Fuecoco, Crocolore, and Skeledirge have no diet data, but they're based off of a crocodile. And you kind of see them in game, you know, when you first get your baby Fuecoco. It eats an orange or whatever. Or naranja, if you would. That's Spanish for duck. I'm losing my mind. I've done over 500. I don't know. Are we at 600 now? I don't even know anymore. We're over halfway. That's all I can say. Mastiff and Babushtiff. It's a dog! Bombardier uses the apron on its chest to bundle up food, which it carries back to its nest. It enjoys dropping things that make loud noises. We've already seen it in another dex entry, and if we haven't, we will see it, that Bombardier does eat other Pokemon. Finizen, on the other hand, is based on the Palafin hero form, where it says it is the hero of the ocean, swimming at a speed of 50 knots and saving drowning people and Pokemon. Says nothing about other Pokemon like that are fish and everything like that. It is also a dolphin, so, extrapolate data as you would. You've been listening this long. You're smart. Cyclizar has no diet data, but it's a lizard, so it's an omnivore. Trumbeak. It eats berries and stores their seeds in its beak. When it encounters enemies or prey, it fires off all the seeds in a burst. It's a gun, shoots it off. There's no other data on Toucanon though, so. Okay, follow me on this one, because we have Yungoos. Although it will eat anything, it prefers fresh living things, so it marches down streets in search of prey. It's diurnal, so it never catches the Raticate or Rattata that it prefers for dinner, but it does have incredible patience. And as gumshoes, they will go after Squavit, though it doesn't really provide enough of a challenge, so they probably leave them alone. They might, assumedly, go after Greedents, but that's a toss-up. Rockruff, say it with me now. Say it with me now. It's a dog! Also based off of Lycanroc, which wears its prey down by degrees before finishing it off. It plays with its food. That's scary. Okay, Wishy-Washy threw me off because at their appearance, even Gyarados will flee. When they team up to use Water Gun, its power exceeds that of Hydro Pump. It is like one of the kings of the sea when it actually teams up. When it's by itself, it gets eaten by a lot of other Pokemon. So it's kind of a toss-up. Because of how it is and how aggressive it can be when they actually team up as a school of fish and fight back, we could assume that when it fights back and wins, that it will eat whatever's left behind. Otherwise, it probably just sustains itself off of plants. And the last entry for the Omnivores is Flamigo, actually. There's no diet data on it, but it's based off of flamingos, which will eat whatever pond reed is in the area, and they'll also go after shrimp. If you didn't know it, flamingos are only pink because of the shrimp that they eat. And it's not because they eat it and it turns them pink from the inside like some weird Oompa Loompa blueberry girl that was in the Willy Wonka and the Child Killing Factory. I don't know if I'm assuming I could say that. I don't care. Either way, it crushes, wow, that was weird. It crushes the shrimp, and it's the proteins that are left on its beak that it preens its feathers with that then allow it to turn pink. So if you give shrimp somehow they're blue, you'll have blue flamingos. Somebody figure it out. I don't know. I'm not going to do it. We are one step from the top of the food chain as we have reached into the carnivores section. They eat meat. And I put them here above everything else, above the omnivores, because these are Pokemon that are primarily going to eat meat. And if they don't eat meat, they're going to go and carry anything that is below it on the food chain if they can get its dirty little hands on it. Now, I know the order is going to be a little bit screwy. I go by Pokedex order, but you can also see the final order of how it visually looks at the end of all this. Because we're starting out with Latent, Torracat, and Incineroar, which, although it's rough-mannered and egotistical, it finds beating down unworthy opponents boring. It gets motivated for stronger opponents, but guess what? Cats are typically carnivores, and it's a fire cat. Squirtle. In the yellow Pokédex, it states it shoots water at prey while in the water, withdraws into its shell when it's in danger. It doesn't explicitly state what prey type, but turtles do eat fish and bugs, so we can say Squirtle is a carnivore. Wartortle and Blastoise state nothing different. Pidgeotto, the claws in its feet are well developed. It can carry prey such as Execute to its nest over 60 miles away. Execute is not a light Pokemon. It is an entire palm tree, not the Alolan one, but the other one is still not a light Pokemon. If it can carry that, it's carrying everything else. Meanwhile, Pidgeot, with its outstanding vision, can spot splashing Magikarp even while flying at 3,300 feet away. For those of you that don't know, 5280, 5 tomatoes, is how you remember how many feet there are in a mile. That is over half a mile away. Ekans is a snake. It eats the eggs of birds, such as Pidgey and Spearow whole, although it might actually get the egg stuck in its mouth and faint, is what it states. It can also freely detach its jaw to swallow larger prey whole. If it becomes too heavy to move, however, they might go after it. Arbok, after stunning its opponents with a pattern on its stomach, quickly wraps them up in its body and waits for them to stop moving. That's a funny way to say that it dies, Mr. Pokemon. Sandslash hides in the trees and will drop onto any prey that dare walk by. Alolan Sandslash is probably similar, but instead of being up in the trees, it probably just digs underneath or just goes after any prey that it can. Nidoking uses its powerful tail in battle to smash, constrict, then break the prey's bones. Interestingly enough, I had to base Vulpix off of its Alolan entry, which they work together in a skulk, a group of foxes. Before eating their prey, they freeze it solid with their negative 58-degree Fahrenheit breath. Ninetales burns its prey to a crisp as it pleases, and the Alolan form of it doesn't state anything different. Now, Zubat is up here because I base it off of Golbat and Crobat. Now, while I know Zubat could potentially eat fruits and small bugs, Golbat and Crobat will bite down on prey and drain them of their blood. Crobat, not as much. It'll just, take some of their blood. So it doesn't full on devour all of your blood, at least for that one. It has some level of self-restraint. But because of those two, we might be able to assume that regular old Zubat may sanguinate foes and survive entirely off of that as well. Meowth, Persian, and Berserker can all be considered to be in this section. They fight Murkrow over prey they're both trying to catch. And with the others, the Alolan Persian states that it's so brutal that it tortures its weakened prey rather than finishing them off, which adds to the support. Poliwhirl marches over the land in search of bug Pokemon, then takes them underwater so it can dine on them where it's safe. In addition, Poliwrath doesn't state anything different, but as I'm basing Poliwhirl off of Poliwrath, I would assume because of all the muscle and the fact that that Pokemon is, I believe, nearly 100% or is 100% muscle, it would make sense that it would need more than just bugs, although I guess bugs do have a lot of protein, so you could argue that they belong in Insectivores. Politoed also doesn't say anything different. Tentacool threw me off as it does absorb sunlight, but it explicitly states that it shoots it off as lasers, whereas Tentacruel is terrifying. It uses its tentacles to ensnare prey and weakens them by dosing it with harsh toxin. With its 80 tentacles, it can catch up to 80 prey at once. This boy, 80 arms, and it will use every single one of them. I have 80 arms, I'm gonna use 80 arms. Although they are rare, when a large outbreak of them occurs, it explicitly states that all fish Pokemon disappear from the surrounding area. That is scary. Can you imagine a Jaws movie, but it's not like Sharpedo? It's I guess you can't call it tentacles because that sounds like something I'm not gonna say here, but when you think about it, I want a Jaws movie but with Tentacruel, and you just notice, where are they? Where have they gone? What do you mean? The fish. Oh no. Look under the water! Look under the water! Everyone get close! And just going from there. That's where my brain goes. Now, I did place regular Slowpoke in Carnivores because it dips its tail to catch prey in the water. It does forget what it's doing very often, but considering it just stays there all day, we can assume it just eats fish. Seal hunts for prey in the frigid sea underneath sheets of ice. When it needs to breathe, it punches a hole through the ice with a sharply protruding section of its head. Dugong has no other information. Shelter doesn't state anything directly, but clams are filter feeders, which are considered carnivores. But Sheldur will feed off of slowpoke line, as we also know, just biting its tail. And Cloyster eats slowpoke tails as its favorite food still, and every once in a while will actively go onto land just to hunt them down for their tails. My boy. More specifically, boy, as Ghastly wraps its opponent in a gas-like body, slowly weakening its prey by poisoning it through its skin. Haunter will lick people and they will grow cold until they die. It actively states that it strikes at humans from total darkness, and Gengar states, should you feel yourself attacked by a sudden chill, it is evidence of an approaching Gengar. There is no escaping. Give up. Its Mega and Gigantamax also follow this line, as it'll trick you into going into its mouth, and you'll be whisked off into an afterlife of sorts if it's the Mega form. Sorry, the Gigantamax form. With the Mega form, it just has so much curse energy that it can't help but curse its trainer as well. So, as much as I love Gengar, if I have to base it off of the Pokedex entries, I don't want one as a real-life Pokemon. I would die. I would die. We would all die. It would be bad, and no good, very bad day. Krabby are known to live on beaches, and there's not really much food there, but they will fight each other. Kingler specifically does state, though, that they're capable of prying open Shelter and Cloyster shells using its 10,000 horsepower pincer. Tangrowth ensnares prey by extending arms made of vines. Losing arms to predators does not trouble it. Yeah, it's just going to keep attacking you until it wins. Seadra generates whirlpools by spinning its body, which is strong enough to even swallow fishing boats. It also weakens prey with these currents and swallows them whole. Kingdra, on the other hand, will awaken here and there and then wander about in search of prey. Doesn't seem to be very picky. Starmie swims by spinning its body at high speed and then cruises through the ocean, absorbing tiny plankton, making this one a filter feeder. Scyther tears and shreds prey with its wickedly sharp scythes. It very rarely spreads its wings to fly. Caesar states nothing different, and Cleavor will swing around its large heavy stone axis to finish off its prey. Magby states nothing other than resting in lava, but Magmar dispatches prey with fire. Doesn't realize, or it often regrets doing this, because then when it wants to eat them, they're nothing but a charred crisp. Magmar doesn't state anything new. Pinsir is astoundingly strong and can lift foes twice its weight. Also, considering the sharp fangs and the way that those pincers are, and that it's kind of an antlion of sorts, yeah, we're gonna say it eats probably people too, to be fair. It is aggressive. Magikarp is actually based on Asian carp, which are filter feeders, and that's why they are carnivores. They're considered carnivores and are in this section, even though there should be, you know, so low as you would expect them to be. Gyarados states nothing about prey, but you look me dead in the eye. You look me dead in the eye and tell me that Gyarados doesn't eat every dang living thing in its path. Besides, I guess, a school of wishy-washy, as we found out. Vaporeon will blend in with the water and patiently wait for its prey, which are fish Pokemon. Whereas Umbreon, with its black fur, it blends into the darkness. It bides its time, then when prey appears, this Pokemon goes for its throat and then eats it. So it actively states that it does hunt. And then the one that shocks me of the evolutions is actually Sylveon, which is really backhanded, which it deserves to be partially a dark type for this. Its ribbon-like feelers give off an aura that weakens hostility in its prey, causing them to let down their guard. Then it attacks. That is messed up. Imagine being soothed and lulled into a false sense of security, and then it just snaps your neck with all those ribbons that it has. Omnivores pretty straightforward, as in prehistoric times it just fed on plankton. It also was preyed on by Archeops. Omastar in its dex entry says apparently it cracked Shelter's shell with its sharp fangs and sucked out the insides. Following along with a lot of our ancient Pokemon, we have Kabuto and Kabutops. Kabutops states that it slices its prey apart and then sucks out the fluids. The discarded body parts become food for other Pokemon. I'm going to say that if Kabuto can attach itself to something, then it would do the same thing. And then we have Aerodactyl, a Pokemon from the age of dinosaurs, and imagined to have been the king of the skies in ancient times. So this big old pterosaur, oddly enough, if I remember correctly, pterosaurs, remember, the P is silent when it goes to the bathroom. Pterosaurs were primarily fish eaters, or maybe other birds, but not really just pick up mammals to my knowledge, based on what we've been figuring out. You can fact check me on that one. I could be wrong. But obviously, Aerodactyl is like a T-Rex of the sky. It's scary. Crocodile is small but rough and tough. It won't hesitate to take a bite out of anything that moves. Meanwhile, Crocodile will bite down, and once it does so, the prey is said to have no hope of escape. And finally, for alligator, attacked with a blinding speed and bites prey. They're crocodiles. What, and alligator at the end, I guess. Go figure. Hoot Hoot I had to base off of Noctowl because Noctowl states it never fails at catching prey in darkness. This Pokemon owes its success to its superior vision that allows it to see in minimum light, and its soft, supple wings that make no sound in flight. Spinarak I did place here mainly because of a Rhyodos later on. It patiently waits for prey to be trapped in its web, and it prefers Cutie Fly. In addition, a Rhyodos attaches silk to its prey, sets it free, and then tracks the silk to the prey and its friends. That is, like, can you imagine breaking free of your imminent doom, running away, thinking you're safe, happy, and lucky, only to realize you've led your natural predator to all of your friends? That's horrifying. Chinchou lets loose positive and negative electrical charges from its two antennas to make its prey faint. Lantern will blind its prey, and when it's incapacitated, swallow it in a single gulp. So, remember when I talked about Yanma? Well, now we're on Yanmega. It prefers to battle by biting apart foes' heads instantly while flying at a high speed. In addition, it's extremely violent. When hunting, it wastes none of its energy, aiming only for the prey's most vulnerable spots. Anyone who managed to tame this must be of incredible bravery. This thing is also 6 feet in length. It is not just eating normal bugs. I refuse to believe it. It is eating squavets and rattatas and anything else. It would eat you. It would eat me. This thing is massive. Do you know how tall I am? I'm like 5'6". That's bigger than me. Gligar clamps down on victims and then just stabs them with its tail to inject its poison. Meanwhile, Gliscor will actually swoop on down when prey least expect it, and then pretty much do the same thing or insanguinate them, take all their blood. Sneasel has by far the biggest entry because it is like the hyena of the mountains, but actually way more aggressive because it drives Pidgey from their nests and feasts on the eggs. It will go ahead and go after other eggs from like where breeders breed Pokemon. It blends into the dark of the night to ambush its prey and will attack Sandshrew. It will actually go after Vulpix, and on top of all that, if they hunt in a pack, they will go after prey as large as Mamoswine, which easily fall to the teamwork of a group of Weavile. Hisuian Sneasel and Sneaselurus state nothing new about their diet, but I doubt they're as hyena-like, so they could just be carnivores as our modern ones are descendants of them. Corsola is going to be at the bottom of our carnivore list as well because they're filter feeders, just like regular coral. They are pursued, however, by Marini, and it'll snap off its own branches in order to try and escape. Remoraid is a scavenger of sorts, but also we know it'll go after flying prey, as it will use abdominal muscles to shoot down flying prey, and will stick under Mantine's underside to scavenge for any leftovers. Clings to Mantine and shares in its prosperity. When Mantine is attacked, Remoraid will fight alongside it, so they're symbiotic, which is really cool. It'll also actually go after Burmy that are outside of the water, and when it evolves into Octillery, it lives in the gaps of boulders and in holes on the seafloor. Its suction cups grip prey tightly. Mantike and Mantine don't state anything on their diet, but we could argue it's a filter feeder carnivore due to its manta ray origin. Houndour is fairly obvious. It is another dog Pokemon, and they will work through teamwork to actually hunt down prey, whereas Houndoom will divvy up their prey evenly among members of the pack. Here's one that I've seen memes of, but I wasn't ready to see. Beautyfly. It has an aggressive nature. It stabs prey with its long, narrow mouth to drain the prey's fluids. Yeah, that's fun. It's also a colorful and incredibly beautiful Pokemon, but also greedy. In an effort to keep its favorite food all to itself, it will chase away Combee as they try to gather nectar. So there's a very good chance it also eats Combee. Wingull has a habit of carrying prey and valuables in its beak and hiding them in all sorts of locations, whereas Pelipper will scoop up numerous prey along with the water that it dips its bill into, including Wishy-Washy, which it states it can devour more than 30 of in one go. Oh, we're on Probopass. Oh, yeah, Probopass is a freaking carnivore. The main body controls 3 mobile units called mini noses. Literally says it in the Pokedex, which it maneuvers to catch prey. It is able to emit powerful magnetism, even controlling the iron sand that forms its luscious mustache. Using this iron sand, Probopass forms hard stones with which it smites its prey. Sure, it could be rock-type Pokemon. You can say what you want. It just says prey. It doesn't say anything else about what it likes to eat. I'm afraid of Probopass. Speaking of Pokemon that you should be afraid of, you're about to learn about 2 more that you should be way more afraid of. Mawile, for instance. Cunning and terrifying Pokemon, its cuteness makes opponents let down their guard, and then it swallows them whole with its huge jaws. Also, its Mega Form, while it doesn't do anything different, has an extremely vicious disposition. It grips prey in its 2 sets of jaws and tears them apart with raw power. Roserade attracts prey with a sweet aroma, then downs it with thorny whips hidden in its arms. I don't know what's in those stones. I don't know what's in the leaf stones, sunstones, and everything, but apparently half of them cause all of these Pokemon to just become these absolutely destructive carnivorous monsters that they are. Carvanha is pretty straightforward. It's literally based off of a piranha swarming and tearing at an intruder with its pointed fangs. It'll also fight with Basculin over food. Sailors avoid Carvanha dens at all costs, and when it evolves into Sharpedo, it pursues prey at speeds of 75 miles per hour and finishes them off with fangs that can crush iron. It's known as the bully of the sea, so it likely goes after anything and everything. Though, it has a sad history, as it was said that it became a victim of overfishing. So humans also eat Sharpedo, which is also based on the fact that there's a lot of fancy dishes where they used to just catch a shark, cut off its fin, and eat it as a delicacy, which is not okay. Wailmer swims along with its mouth open and swallows down seawater along with its food. It sprays excess water out of its nostrils. Wailord is the largest of all Pokemon. It herds prey in a pack, then swallows the massed prey in one gulp. They will also eat entire schools of Wishy-Washy whole, so Wishy-Washy doesn't belong above Wailmer. I shouldn't be surprised by this next entry, but it still hurts my heart. Trapinch makes a conical pit in a desert where it waits for prey to come tumbling down. Vibrava will make prey faint with its ultrasonic waves, and actually these waves also induce headaches in people. And it'll melt up its prey with its acid, so they likely hunt us down too. And finally, Flygon. The flapping of its wings sounds something like singing. Those lured by the sound are enveloped in a sandstorm, becoming Flygon's prey. They also will use these sandstorms to conceal Crocodile, which after they find their prey together, they then split their prey between them. One grass-type Pokemon that you should probably know about is Cacnea, where it lives in arid locations such as deserts. It'll use its sharp thorns to just shoot into the opponent's body and bring their victims down, as it releases a strong aroma from its flower to attract prey. In addition, Cacturn will just follow any victims through the desert, any travelers, as it's specifically stated, until they're too exhausted to move, and then you can imagine what happens next. Tangus is mortal enemies with Seviper, and I know we're going to talk about Seviper in a moment, which will attack unwary prey with venomous fangs. The 2 of them are like mortal enemies, and when we look at Seviper's entry in battle, it uses its bladed tail to counter any Zangoose. So we can state that both of these are carnivores. I mean, look at them. Barboach uses its whiskers as a radar, which it can use to detect prey even in incredibly murky water, giving it a massive advantage against other Pokemon that can't see in such horrible conditions. Whereas Whiscash will swallow its prey whole, along with the mud from the swamp floors. Lilleep, I shouldn't have been surprised by either. It disguises itself as seaweed to ambush its prey and then devours them whole when they get close. Meanwhile, Cradily freely extends its tree trunk-like neck and captures unwary prey using its 8 tentacles. Enarth will grip prey firmly between its 2 claws, and then Armaldo lived on land and went out into the sea to hunt for prey. Its sharp claws were its greatest weapon. So, while it is a carnivore, it was likely just a pescatarian or pescivore, which is basically just eats fish. Kecleon states that it changes its shading in order to fit its surroundings to sneak up on prey. And considering they're based on a chameleon, I mean, technically it could just be an insectivore, but they are a rather large chameleon-esque thing, so we can leave it here. Feel is another fun dex entry, which is kind of messed up altogether. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit with this trio of Pokemon evolutions, because it'll spot its prey and then inform Walrein in its herd about it. Then you have Celio, which will hunt prey up to 5 times a day, shattering ice and everything, getting under the water. There's no additional data on Walrein. But when Spheal gets its food and its mealtime, they all clap at once to show their pleasure. Because of this, their mealtimes are noisy. So that just sounds terrifying to think about all these Spheals clapping their flippers all at once over their prey. And I know we see that, and we see it in, like, maybe you see it in an aquarium show or something like that, and they clap and the seal is all happy and blah 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 blah. But when you have an entire gobbledygook of these creatures all doing this, and let's say you're not even dead, that's a horrible final sight to see. Clamperl states that despite its appearance, it's carnivorous. It clamps down on its prey with both sides of its shell and doesn't let go until they stop moving. Huntail will move its tail in mimicry of an animal before luring in any prey. And finally, Goribus specifically states that it sucks bodily fluids out of its prey. The leftover meat sinks to the seafloor, where it becomes food for other Pokemon. Relicanth fed on microscopic organisms with its toothless mouth. Filter feeder. Love-Disc might end up leaving on its own, which leaves it open to attack, and then Pelipper will come and snatch it up. It makes its home in coral reefs and sleeping between Corsola's branches. I'm likely just gonna say it's a filter feeder with how much it moves around. So then we have Piplup here. That's there we go, right there. That's the boy. Lives along the shore in northern countries. A skilled swimmer, it dives for over 10 minutes while hunting. Prinplup and Empoleon state nothing different. It's a penguin. We finally get the last of the Starly line. A Staraptor can easily fly while gripping small Pokemon. Doesn't state that it's just bug Pokemon. Protect your snubbles. Jinx we base off of Luxio, because Luxio is a gracious Pokemon evenly sharing the spoils of the hunt with others of its kind, and Luxray can spot hiding prey, even those taking shelter behind a wall, when its eyes gleam gold. This dude has X-ray vision, and I never knew that. Weasel will inflate its flotation sac and then keep its face above the water as it searches for prey and their movement. Meanwhile, Floatzel states it is a common sight around fishing ports. It is known to rescue people and carry off prey. Shellos live in the sea and feasts on plankton, so we have our filter feeder. The lovelier the ocean where Shellos resides, the more vibrant its color becomes, whereas Gastrodon eats beach sand for nourishment. Should one Gastrodon encounter another one, a fierce battle will inevitably ensue. The reason they're not at the absolute bottom as a filter feeder is they're rather large Pokemon with some, they're slugs. They're big old, they're gastropods, Gastrodon, you get it? So it makes sense, but I don't think they belong at the bottom, like the absolute bottom with all the filter feeders. They can defend themselves fairly well. Gibble nests in small horizontal holes in cave walls and pounces to catch prey that stray too close. Gabite loves shiny things, and while it doesn't eat them, it will catch Carbink in order to put on their piles. Garchomp flies at speeds equal to a jet fighter plane and never allows its prey to escape. I always forget that Garchomp can fly like that, and when I saw it in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I've never, ever experienced true fear like that before. It is a land shark that can fly. Oh, and it doesn't stop there, because while searching for prey, it has mid-air battles with Salamence as the two compete for food. So there's a very good chance that the loser eats the winner, or the winner eats the loser. Yeah, that's how fighting works. I'm not coming back from the dead to eat a wolf that ate my body. Unless I want to know what, that'd be kind of cool though. Rylui based on the Lucario entry, which states that they can detect the species of a living being and its emotions from over half a mile away. They control auras and hunt their prey in packs. Lucario hunts in packs. Scurpy lives in arid regions, can go without food for a year while waiting for its prey. When it's confronted by Hippowdon, it actually keeps a low profile and never picks a fight with them, technically putting Hippowdon higher than them, even though it doesn't actually eat them. Really interesting fact about real life is that here's an example of why food chains are really weird, right? Other than some of the ones I've already given, is that bears and bobcats. I want you to think about which one is higher than the other on the food chain. If you said bears, you're wrong. Bobcats are what bears will actually avoid. They don't want to get into a fight with a bobcat because it's not worth the fight for the nutrition or the amount of food they could get from them. Meanwhile, bobcats are very aggressive and they fight to the death almost every single time. So that puts the bobcat above the bear, as the bobcat will not be afraid to hunt down anything that crosses its path. Carnivine. Do I really need to spell this one out for you? I will tell you though, that it attracts prey with sweet-smelling saliva, then chomps them down. It could take a whole day to actually eat that prey. It'll also dangle its little vines down in order to catch prey, and it specifically states, though it is a plant Pokemon, it has a gluttonous and unruly temperament and attacks its prey with its cavernous maw wide open. So you get to face death in its full glory, jaws wide open. Okay, Ronfinian. And I was wrong earlier. I had forgotten it was Cutiefly and Ribbonbee that don't state what they get eaten by in their dex entries. So Finian has a bunch of entries for it. Basically, it absorbs sunlight to create a camouflage with its pink skin. But what that also does is it attracts prey to it that it can then eat. When it jumps out of the water, Wingull will go ahead and catch it on the fly, and it will fight with other Pokemon such as Lantern when it evolves into Luminian. Then the final part about it is that since this Pokemon lives on the deep sea floor walking around, yes, it states that it walks around on the seabed, it'll search for its favorite food, Starmie. Purloin, it's a cat. Liepard strictly states that it does sneak up on its targets, and it sneaks up on any other prey, including the fact that it competes with Thievul for territory. Now, I'm not a fan of centipedes. They scare me. They're probably a big fear of mine, and by probably, I mean I go into kill mode whenever I see one. And now I'm looking over the room because if I see a centipede right now, I'm gonna go ape and I'm gonna punch it, and we're good. I don't see it. We're fine. So Venipede, despite my fears of centipedes, are really, really cool Pokemon, I have to admit. So its bite injects a potent poison enough to paralyze large bird Pokemon that try to prey on it. Venipede and Sizzlipede are similar in species, but when the two meet, a huge fight ensues. We can assume they probably eat each other, and there's no new data on Whirlipede other than it fighting back against predators, which it probably also eats. Finally, Scolipede engage in fierce territorial battles with Centiskorch. At the end of one of these battles, the victor makes a meal of the loser. I'm in the 5th gen. I'm in the 5th gen. I'm in the 5th gen. It's almost over. It's almost over. And then I just Jover. It's almost over. And then all I have to do are special Pokemon. And those are easy. Those are fairly easy. I can get through this. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Basculin have a lot of entries as well. When a school of Basculin appears on a lake, everything else disappears except for Corphish and Crawdons. That's how violent Basculin are. And the Pokedex says all of that at verbatim. It's so vicious that it's called the Thug of the River. Thug. Yet Basculin is still targeted by predators such as Dundonzo and Burbadir. Basculegion, on the other hand, I kept it here as it's only cloaked in the souls of its fallen comrades. It doesn't say that it doesn't eat, but it brings them up, trying to carry them to the end of their journey with it. Sandile conceals itself in the sand and chomps down on the legs of any prey that unwarily walk over it. Its favorite food is Trapinch. Meanwhile, Krokorok buries some of its prey in the sand to use as emergency meals when its hunts are unsuccessful. And finally, we've talked about Crocodile a little bit, but it does state that it is a very violent Pokemon that try to clamp down on anything that moves in front of their eyes. Speaking of their eyes, they can actually see perfectly through for miles through sandstorms. And that's why they team up with Flygon. So if you thought Flygon was a friend, Flygon is not a friend if it's a wild Flygon. They are terrifying and they will do anything for their food, including teaming up with the bully of the sands. Tortuga. About 100 million years ago, these Pokemon swam in oceans. Tartov also went on land to attack prey, so they're not just regular old sea turtles. Then we go to Caracosta, which would actually eat Omastar and Omanite whole and not be bothered in the slightest by their shells. Fungus lures people in with its Pokeball pattern, then releases poison spores. It also lures Pokemon in with that pattern. And Amoonguss lures prey close by dancing and waving its arm caps, which resemble Pokeballs in a swaying motion. These things eat anything it can, including humans. Frillish paralyze their prey with poison and drag them down to their lairs 5 miles below the surface. So if you don't die from the poison, which you don't because you're paralyzed, you will die from the unending pressure of the water cascading over your body. Or drowning. Meanwhile, Jaliscens is always hanging around fancy cruise ships and tankers, hoping to drag away its prey. We are its prey. Alamamala has no diet data, although it is really cute because floating in the open sea is how they live. When they find a wounded Pokemon, they embrace it and bring it to shore. We can argue it's a filter feeder, and it's really cute that it does that. I know there are Pokemon that take advantage of that, which is really sad. Galvantulus says that it lays traps of electrified threads near the nests of bird Pokemon, aiming to snare chicks that are not yet good at flying. Tynamo is based on electric, which wraps itself around prey and paralyzes it with electricity. Electros crawl out of the ocean using their arms, which I don't know if you've ever seen a lamprey, an eel lamprey in person. They are scary. They're flesh noodles. They're like, I don't know. I can't even say it. I can't even say it. I said flesh noodle. I really just said flesh noodle. It's fine. It's fine. Anywho, they'll attack prey onshore and immediately drag it into the ocean. So if you're not dead, gone. You're gone. Fracture uses its thick tusks to neatly cut prey into 2 portions, one to eat now and one to save for later. Meanwhile, Haxorus is super resilient with its horns and everything, and it licks up dirt to take in the minerals it needs to keep its tusks in top condition, which is just a supplement. Now, Cubchoo I did base off of Beartick, and they are polar bears. So Beartick makes its breath freeze at will, very able in the water. It swims around in northern seas and catches prey. I read that at verbatim, and that's why I stumbled on it, because it just didn't sound good out of my face mouth hole. Cryogonal are born in snow clouds. They use chains made of ice crystals to capture prey. Also, very interesting thing about them versus Vanillite and everything is the fact that when it gets warm, Vanillites just aren't around as much. When Cryogonal disappear because of it being too warm, they do come back. Like, it is studied that they are the same ones when they come back. So, whereas one dies in the heat, it can be assumed that Cryogonal is like a possessed snowflake, you know? Even though it's not a ghost type. Stunfisk conceals itself in the mud of the seashore, then it waits. When prey touch it, it delivers a jolt of electricity. Meanwhile, Galarian Stunfisk is conspicuous and lures prey in as it lies in wait in the mud. When they get close, it clamps its jagged steel fins down on them because it's basically a bear trap. And if you aren't looking at this and just treating this like a podcast, which I don't blame you, Galarian Stunfisk has a Pokeball in the center of it. We are also its prey, and you can't convince me otherwise. Poniard fight at Bisharp's command. They cling to their prey and inflict damage by sinking their blades into it. Bisharp pursues prey in the company of a large group of Poniard, then finish off the prey. And then King Gambits, I mean, we know that they are like a Bisharp that only survived because it is like the top of the top Bisharp. So we can assume that they also consume prey. Braviary I had to base off of it being Hisuian. Also, it's a freaking eagle. Screaming a blood-curdling battle cry, this huge and ferocious bird Pokemon goes out on the hunt. It blasts lakes with shockwaves, then scoops up any prey that float to the water's surface. This dude is dynamite fishing. Volbeat tend to guard their posteriors with suitable bones that they have found and pursue weak Pokemon. Meanwhile, Mandibuzz skillfully arranges the bones of its prey to construct its nest. Most of these bones are Q-bones. Cute bones, get it? I've hit my wall. I've hit the new wall. Fletchling is based on Fletchner because from its beak, it fires embers at its prey. Once it's caught them, it grills them at a high heat before feasting upon them. And then Talonflame's favorite foods are Wingull and Pick-a-Peck. It will attack with a powerful kick and then grasp them firmly in its talons. I immediately start thinking of the rider kick that you find in like anime left, right, and center. It shouldn't shock you that Litleo and Pyroar are carnivores. They're cats. They're lions. When Litleo are young, they live with a pride until they're able to hunt prey on their own, and then they're kicked out to make their own way. Pyroar doesn't use its flame on its prey as it prefers to eat raw meat, and then the female one will work together to bring down prey. It's thanks to them that their pride doesn't starve. So that's actually accurate to real life prides of lions and everything. The male one is pretty lazy and has like 8 or 9 females that all day. If you're catching my drift without me saying it out loud, all day. You have to make a pride somehow, you know? Oh, also, if it doesn't actually produce young, they bite it. Pancham chooses a Pangoro as its master, then imitates the actions of it. That's how it learns to battle and hunt for prey. Meanwhile, Pangoro doesn't state anything extra. It does live for duels against Obstagoon. Doesn't necessarily say that it actually eats them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they ate each other. Esper and Meowstic doesn't have any diet data, but because it's likely based on a house cat or yokai, we've talked about cats. Inkay draws prey near with its blinking lights and then wraps them up in its long tentacles and holds them in place. Malamar lures prey close with hypnotic motions, then wraps its tentacles around it before finishing it off with digestive fluids. It can also hypnotize people, as it is stated that people believe it played a major role in certain history-changing events. There's a whole episode of a Malamar basically taking over, and it's scary, and it's probably one of the most evil Pokemon out there because it's not stupid. It is very intelligent, and it knows what it's doing. Dark Psychic, baby. Clauncher knock down flying prey by firing compressed water from their massive claws like a shooting pistol. When those claws fall off, it is known that those meats on the inside are very edible, and the problem with it is that the distinct flavor doesn't appeal to all tastes. So we have eaten Clauncher before. Whereas Clawitzer, after using the feelers on its oversized claw to detect the location of prey, launches a cannonball of water at its target. Its right arm is packed with meat and is exported to be used as a cooking ingredient. So we absolutely do eat this Pokemon. Tyrant just tears apart anything that it could get into its hefty jaws, and Tyrantrum is said that nothing could stop this Pokemon 100 million years ago, so it behaved like a king. It's a Tyrantrum, a king. Pumpkaboo is terrifying, and I'm just going to basically read at verbatim their entries. We can base it off of Gourgeist, which enwraps its prey in hair-like arms, singing joyfully as it observes the suffering of its prey. Oh my god. Oh, it gets worse, and I feel awful for this, because I want you to remember that when I say these next entries. Small Gourgeists pretend to be children to full adults. Anyone who falls for the act gets carried away to the hereafter. Large Gourgeists put on the guise of adults, taking the hands of children to lead them to the afterlife. And supersized Gourgeists aren't picky. They will forcefully drag anyone off to the afterlife. Right there. It's right there. I have one right there. At any moment, if I disappear, we know why. We know exactly why. Well, it's an interesting one as it builds up energy via photosynthesis during the day and then flies silently through the night on the prowl for prey. Dartrix seldom misses with its attacks as it shoots out its sharpened quills at its prey, and there's no other information on Decidueye or its Hisuian form, but it does still use those quills as its arrows or otherwise. Poplio, Brionne, and Primarina, we're just gonna have to base it off of Primarina, which every battle is a stage. It takes down its prey with beautiful singing and dancing, and considering the animal that it's based on, it only makes sense. Marini is another scary one that attacks a lot of prey, as it plunges the poison spike on its head into its prey. When the prey has weakened, it deals a finishing blow with its 10 tentacles. It crawls on the beaches and seafloors. The coral that grows on Corsola's head is as good as a 5-star banquet to this Pokemon. It wanders the seaside further, going after any pincurchin that it tries to eat, but it gets electric shocks from. When it evolves into Toxapex, it crawls along the ocean floor on its 12 legs, leaving trails of Corsola bits scattered in its wake. And with the poison in its body, it's so toxic that Pokemon as large as Wailord will still be suffering 3 days after it first takes effect. Toxapex gets into fierce battles with Bruxish over areas where warm ocean currents flow, but the odds are always against it. So it tries to fight it. Also, Bruxish is a psychic type, so that makes sense why that's the case. But it tries to fight it anyway, and if it wins, you know it's eating it. We finally hit Dewpider, which states when it comes across enemies or potential prey, this Pokemon smashes its water bubble covered head into them. Arachnid launches the water bubbles with its legs, drowning prey within the bubbles on land. It then takes its time and savors its meal. Lurantis masquerades as a bug Pokemon, and then once they lower their guard, its sickles are used to then bring them down. At first, I almost left it in Herbivore, but the fact that it's developed such an ability to guard itself in such a capacity, and it is based off of the praying mantis, I am going to say that it is more than just bug Pokemon that it probably takes down, and probably takes down anything else that it can. So I mentioned Shiinotic previously, and Shiinotic will emit flickering spores that cause drowsiness. When its prey succumbs to sleep, this Pokemon feeds on them by sucking in their energy. It fights for territory with Parasect, which everything gets covered in spores when the two of them fight, and this is why they are primarily in the carnivore section, other than, you know, just general idealization, is that if you see a light deep in a forest at night, don't go near. Shiinotic will make you fall fast asleep. That is a warning. It will eat you. Salandit has a lot to go on too, which is kind of fun. It emanates a sweet smelling poisonous gas that attracts bug Pokemon that attacks them. It weakens opponents with that gas, but it doesn't deal with Spinda because Spinda is already all over the place, confused and reeling. And it will sneak up on prey and immobilize them before they even realize Salandit is there. I don't think that's limited to bug type Pokemon, especially since there's no new data on Salazzle, but those Salazzle will just tell Salandit whatever it wants to eat, and they'll go get it like the little simps that they are. And if two Salazzle meet, they fight over all the males in each other's groups because they want to be the alpha female. Stuffula had it based off of Beware. The moves it uses to take down its prey would make a martial artist jealous. It tucks subdued prey under its arms to carry them to its nest. And its habitat is generally off limits, which could mean that it would go after us too. It doesn't seem to be very picky. Now, normally with ghost types, I wouldn't have put them into this section, but when we look at Sandigas, it mainly inhabits beaches and puts its control over anybody that puts its hand into its mouth, which then it forces them and commands them to make its body bigger, which is how it becomes Palossand, which buried beneath the castle are masses of dried up bones from those whose vitality it has drained. Now, you can't just tell me that it only drained vitality. It had to have actually eaten them, otherwise they wouldn't be full on bones. It is known as the Beach Nightmare, as it pulls its prey down into the sand by controlling the sand itself, then it sucks out their souls. It has to be more than just an inorganic heterotroph, but you could put it there and I would understand. Pukumuka, on the other hand, will eject its eternal organs, which it uses to engulf its prey or battle enemies. You've seen it. Whump! Back to Bruxish now, as we've talked about it previously. It stuns its prey with psychokinesis and then grinds them to mush with its strong teeth. Even Shelter Shell is no match for it. It also burrows beneath the sand and waits for prey, and it can fend off Marini with its robust teeth. It actually crunches up the spikes and then eats them. Domize has a couple of different entries that states what it does, but let me strike true fear into your heart. It wraps its prey in green seaweed and sucks away their vitality. It only likes to go after big prey like Wailord. Now, it doesn't say it directly in the Pokedex, but I want you to realize Domize is not the anchor. Domize is the seaweed, and it will extend itself continually as much as it possibly can, and it will go after you on land. You are never safe. Jangmo I based on Hakamo, as it leaps at its prey with a courageous shout. Its scaly punches tear its opponents to shreds. Meanwhile, Komo, when it howls after finishing off its prey, the metallic sounds of its celebrating comrades can be heard from all around. Going back to the Sword and Shield trio, Drizzle is the only one that has confirmed to actually eat other Pokemon, as it finishes off its prey with great skill via its slimy tongue that moves at high speeds. There is no additional information on Inteleon, but when you have a sniper in the shape of a water Pokemon, I'm not arguing it. Silicobra and Sandaconda, they're based off of anacondas, and they have no other data, so it's fair to say that they are kind of constrictor snakes and venomous snakes mixed into one, so do what you will. Camerons will get hungry and swallow Arrokuda whole, though it does make the mistake and try to swallow other Pokemon than its preferred prey. Now, its throat is not wide enough to actually swallow Pikachu, but when it does start to swallow Pikachu, it doesn't spit it out. It doesn't try to stop. It just keeps going. Arrokuda is kind of stupid, as it just shoots itself in a straight line to try and catch its prey, but it also has really poor eyesight, so it doesn't do well. They're also targeted very quickly by flocks of Wattrel, and when it evolves into Barrascuda, Its fangs are sharp as a spear and as strong as steel. And apparently, it does state in the Pokedex, apparently Barraskewda's flesh is surprisingly tasty too. It will viciously bite down on Wingull, flying too close to the surface, and battle fiercely with pods of Finizen over prey. So, either the Finizen are protecting it, which it's not Palafin, it's Finizen. So I think they're both going after the same prey. Sizzlipede we've briefly mentioned before, but as is per its Pokedex entry state, it wraps prey up with its heated body and cooks them within its coils. Once it's well done, it boils them down to the last morsel. Meanwhile, Centiskorch is extremely hostile and has large and very sharp fangs, so it probably just goes after everything. Clobbopus is very curious, and it just, the way that it investigates things is just by punching it, so that's really funny to me. The search for food is what brings it up on land apparently, and there's no other data from Grappalogs, but we've mentioned it before, and we know that it's a carnivorous creature. Ice-Q, contrary to its looks, Ice-Q is a poor swimmer. It creates ice balls at the tip of its single hair to lure prey in and fish them up. Now we have the all-British fossil rejects, such as Arctozolt. The Pokemon lived on prehistoric seashores and was able to preserve food with ice on its body. It went extinct because it moved so slowly. I'm gonna say that it's a predator, especially considering its other forms like Dracovish, which powerful legs and jaws made it the apex predator of its time. Its own overhunting of its prey was what drove it to extinction. And finally, Arctovish, though it's able to capture prey by freezing its surroundings, it has trouble eating the prey afterward because its mouth is on top of its head. We're finally in the final stretch before we talk about all the special Pokemon. Tarountula. The ball of threads wrapped around his body is elastic enough to deflect the sides of Scyther, which is this Pokemon's natural enemy. Spidops will cling to branches and ceilings using its thread and moves without sound. It then takes out its prey before they even notice it. It's a special ops spider. It's pretty cool. The design is a little lackluster in the 3D form, but it's a really cool Pokemon. I wish I had like one more form. Knacklestack. We talked about Knackley before. Time to get scared, because this Pokemon dry cures its prey by spraying salt all over them. The curing process steals away the water in the prey's body. You get dehydrated on the spot, baby. And Garganacl will rub its fingertips together and sprinkle injured Pokemon with salt. Even severe wounds will promptly heal afterwards. Or at least Garganacl's not like horribly evil and it doesn't attack everything. That's a nice change of pace. Wattrel will go from the air into the water, diving into the ocean and catching prey by electrocuting them, and there's no additional information on Kilowattrel. Here's another one I wasn't exactly expecting to be the case, as Toadscool live in muggy forests. The flaps that fall from its body are chewy and very delicious, so we eat it. And then you have Toadscruel, which coils its 10 tentacles around prey and sucks out their nutrients, causing the prey pain. The folds along the rim of its head are a popular delicacy, so it's a eat or be eaten world out here. Cloth has no diet data, but it does say that it lunges for weak spots in its opponents, and it is a crab. Wiglet's an interesting one. First off, Veluza, it'll pick up the scent of over 65 feet away and then hide itself in the sand, but the Pokedex also says it has a vicious temperament. Contrary to what its appearance may suggest, it wraps its long bodies around prey, then drags the prey into its den. I wasn't ready to see. I mean, it's an eel. It's not like a mole like Diglett actually is. Veluza discards unnecessary flesh, and its mind becomes honed and its psychic power increases. The spare flesh has a mild but delicious flavor, so we could potentially eat Veluza. And it also has incredible regenerative capabilities and charges at its prey constantly. You've seen it. You've been chased down by these things in the game if you've played it. And we have finally hit the end of the carnivores, as we have Dondozo and Tatsugiri, which Dondozo is a glutton, but it's bad at getting food. So it teams up with Tatsugiri to catch prey. Tatsugiri is an extremely cunning Pokemon, as it feigns weakness to lure in prey, then orders its partner to attack. So they feed together on anything they catch in their symbiotic relationship. This is it. We finally hit the end. Now, humans would probably be somewhere right here before this section that we're about to talk about now. The legendaries, mythicals, ultra beasts, and paradox Pokemon, which is being dubbed special Pokemon. Now, I know I said it very early on, which is the fact that I'm considering them similar to invasive species. They are Pokemon that exist outside of the food chain. There is nothing that is going to hunt them down, and there are no real Pokemon here that are going to hunt each other down. If they do, it is mutually assured destruction. It makes no sense. So we begin the end of the food chain, the tip of the top, and we finish this. Beginning with Articuno. Now we can say it's an inorganic heterotroph if we base it off of the information from Zapdos and Moltres' Pokedex, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Whereas with the Galarian forms, we can say that they're at least omnivores or herbivores. In addition to that, because we know that they eat the Dynatree fruits. I can't just strictly keep it to the Pokedex for some of these, otherwise we wouldn't get accurate information, and it gets messy. So if I mess something up in this part, please inform me. I know there's probably scenes in the anime and stuff, but I try not to rely on that, and I want to have it be game information only. So when we look at Zapdos, it usually lives in thunderclouds and gains energy when it is stricken by lightning bolts. It's hard to tell if that is simply the electric organ or if that's its actual energy, but it doesn't seem to come down unless somebody bothers it. Moltres, if injured, dips its body in the molten magma of a volcano to burn and heal itself. With Mewtwo, because its battle abilities were raised to the ultimate level, it thinks only of defeating its foes. It usually remains motionless to conserve energy so that it may unleash its full power in battle. And, I mean, I guess we can argue it's a carnivore eating primarily fish, or is an autotroph similar to Aberline. The reason why I say fish is because it's found in that cave. And it can mega evolve on its own, and again, it's a whole mess. I don't know if the fishing hole cave is canonical. I mean, what do I even say to a lot of this? You know, it's a mess. Mew is said to possess the genetic composition of all Pokemon. It is capable of making itself invisible at will, so it entirely avoids notice even if it approaches people. The Pokedex does also say, because it can learn any move, some people began research to see if it's the ancestor of all Pokemon. We can say this one's an autotroph for sure. Why would you fight? Think of like the Ditto explanation. Why would you fight something when you can assure peace, stay on your own, and just photosynthesize? Raikou doesn't have a diet that's stated, and neither does Entei or Suicune, but with the three of them, they have carnivorous origins, looking at Raikou as a saber-tooth, Entei as an omnivore due to dog origins, and Suicune possibly being a carnivore due to leopard-esque origins. They are the three legendary dog Pokemon, so they either are omnivores, or maybe they don't eat Pokemon. Maybe they are just protectors. This is what the hard part about legendaries are sometimes. Lugia chooses to live out of sight deep under the seas, sleeping basically constantly. The reason it does this is because it's so powerful that it just rips everything apart by just existing. So it's either a carnivore or it doesn't eat. Meanwhile, Ho-Oh is likely an autotroph because it is said to live at the foot of a rainbow, and it glows in its 7 colors depending on the angle at which they are struck by light. So it's absorbing this light and also shedding it as it creates the rainbow. Celebi traveled through time to come from the future, bolsters grass and trees with its own strength, and it can heal wounds too. I'm gonna say it's an herbivore. Also, there's a really adorable gif of Celebi just kind of whoop, 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 coming up, grabbing a berry and eating it, and how could I say no to that? Regirock grabs rocks in order to repair itself and just honk right back onto its body, so it's an inorganic heterotroph. Regice will not melt at any point, even when it's immersed in magma, but it doesn't say anything about restoring itself, so it just doesn't really get damaged, I guess, or melt, so it just doesn't need to eat. And then Registeel is made out of a metal from beyond our stars. If that metal was on our planet, maybe it would eat, but otherwise it likely doesn't eat, as this Pokemon doesn't even get scratched by anything, not even diamonds. Latias and Latios grow strong connections with people and Pokemon emotionally and are incredibly intelligent Pokemon. As such, due to their empathy, I doubt that they would eat other creatures and are just herbivores. Kyogre and Groudon sleep under the earth or under the sea as close as they can to it in order to absorb primeval energy, so that way they can return to their origin forms and have their full power again. Otherwise, it doesn't state anything about them eating anything, and we can possibly state that they are inorganic heterotrophs, as they are the embodiment of the sea and the land itself. They are elemental titans. Though despite that, we can confirm Rayquaza is an inorganic heterotroph, because it says the many meteors in its body provide the energy it needs to mega evolve as it consumes them for sustenance. Jirachi has no diet data. It's likely an autotroph. It just sleeps all the time after all, and that's probably how it just gains its energy. Deoxys. This is an interesting one that I'm going to argue is a predator at the very least, if not a carnivore. The reason being is that Deoxys is an alien virus that fell to Earth on a meteorite that underwent a DNA mutation to become this Pokemon. Now, viruses are technically predators. Don't go to school and say that viruses are predators. Don't go to college and say viruses are predators. Yes, they attack things in order to live, but without us, they can't live. They're a weird parasite. But when you make a virus a living thing, because viruses aren't living things, they would be a predator. So, Deoxys is a predator. It is a carnivore, technically. It would possibly even be an omnivore. We're going to speedrun these next ones, as Uxie, Mesprit, Azelf, Dialga, and Palkia are the representations of knowledge, emotion, determination, time, and space, and they are all directly created by Arceus. As such, I'm going to make the hard call that they don't eat. I guess you could say Uxie, Mesprit, or Azelf might be herbivores, but I doubt it. They have their own realms that they control and everything. Heatran might be an inorganic heteromorph, as it does kind of boil through Mount Coronet, and its steel body holds many mysteries, so there's a very good chance that it's melting it and forming it to its body. Regigigas, though, is based on a full-on golem, and it likely doesn't eat, it does nothing but sleep, and it wants to sleep until you ruin it, making it rampage because now it's cranky, so it's likely an autotroph that just gains its energy by sleeping. Giratina, very similar to the rest of the ones that I previously talked about. It is the representation of the void to some capacity, so it likely just doesn't eat. Cresselia, though, on nights around the quarter moon, the aurora from its tail extends and undulates beautifully. It's likely an autotroph. We've talked about sunlight banking off of the moon and being absorbed into Pokemon as a form of... oh god, I've done this for too long in my brain. Photosynthesis, there it is, photosynthesis. And moonlight's just sunlight. Phione, a Pokemon that lives in warm seas and inflates the flotation sac on its head to drift and search for food. It's likely an omnivore or at least an herbivore eating moss. In addition, Manaphy is 80% water and it easily affected by its environment. It doesn't eat or is an herbivore, maybe a possible autotroph because of the glowing that it can do with its body. Something I didn't know about Darkrai is that to protect itself, it afflicts those around it with nightmares. However, it means no harm. It doesn't say anything about doing it in order to feed, so it could be an inorganic heterotroph, otherwise it doesn't eat. Shaman's pretty straightforward. It's covered in grass and flowers, and it blooms if hugged and senses gratitude, so it's probably a mix between autotroph and inorganic heterotroph, as it absorbs good feelings, happiness, and it absorbs sunlight as photosynthesis. Arceus. Do I need to tell you what Arceus eats? I'm gonna just read to you. It is the heavenly fount from which pours the light that shines across history. Its luminance guides and protects all Pokemon. Hisuian mythology states that Arceus is the creator of all things. You tell me that thing eats. You tell me that God eats. Because if God eats, we're dead. Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and Keldeo fought for the rights of Pokemon and protected them at every turn. Terrakion specifically states that it will mercilessly crush anyone or anything that bullies small Pokemon, so I'm going to say that they're all herbivores. Meanwhile, Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, being what they are, they fight with each other, they're basically genies. They likely just don't eat. They are beings of nature itself. Reshiram has no diet data. It's likely an autotroph because if we base it off of Zekrom, Zekrom states this Pokemon appears in legends. In its tail, it has a giant generator that creates electricity. Now, it's hard to say if that is because that is, once again, to fuel its power or to fuel it as actual energy. I'm going to say it's a self-generating autotroph. Kyurem, within it, has a dwelling power even greater than Reshiram or Zekrom, but the extreme cold keeps that power bound. Likely an autotroph, being self-generating. Meloetta has no diet data, of course, possibly an herbivore, but it could be an inorganic heterotroph if it lives off of music, so that'd be pretty cool. Genesect is a robotic cockroach that was brought back from however many years ago. It doesn't eat, it's a robot. Xerneas states that legends say it can share eternal life. It slept for 1,000 years in the form of a tree before its revival. Autotroph. Yveltal, though, when the legendary Pokemon's wings and tail feathers spread wide and glow red, it absorbs the life force of living creatures, making it an inorganic heterotroph. Now, Zygarde's really cool. I didn't realize this about Zygarde, so I'm going to read this direct. because I'm going to say it's an autotroph powered by the health of the ecosystem, as when Zygarde reaches its true form, when it uses its overwhelming power to suppress those who endanger the ecosystem. When it's at its 100%, it has enough power to overwhelm even Xerneas and Yveltal. It is stronger than the forces of life and death itself, which could essentially mean that it gains or garners power from the life cycle, and off-putting that balance would kill Zygarde, so it protects it. Deontay is a rock. It lives underground amongst all the other Carbink, and it just looks pretty based on what the Pokedex says. I don't think it eats. Hoopa, also, I'm going to say it doesn't eat. It has its powers sealed, and so it probably just has infinite energy that it's trying to unseal and become even more powerful. So it doesn't need to eat because it doesn't need the energy. Volcanion, I will argue, is an inorganic heterotroph because it is basically a steam engine. As it expels its internal steam from the arms on its back, it has enough power to blow away a mountain. It is a water fire type. Tapu Koko, Lele, Bulu, and Fini are all deities of the islands in Alola. Now, I will argue that they don't eat, or at least they're herbivores in that case, because they are very protective of all Pokemon and people on these islands that then fight against the Ultra Beasts. With that, I mean, they're not all good. They will attack. They will be mischievous. I mean, Tapu Lele drops little scales on the ground that if you touch them, you get healed. But you can, like, over-heal, and it could kill you. Like, it could actually heal you so much it kills you. Type Null is either an herbivore or it doesn't eat. It does have the mask on its face that kind of restrains it, and it has a lot of power within its body waiting to get let out. Meanwhile, Silvally can activate the RKS system, the Arceus system, by employing specific memories, and can change its typing to confound its enemies. So if that's the case, I mean, it could be a heterotroph that, you know, it could be a carnivore, an omnivore. It could also be an autotroph if it doesn't want to fight, considering it would probably be, other than the two failed ones that really went on a rampage, if they're tamed and they were natural creatures, you could assume that they would turn into grass types and just absorb sunlight for the rest of their lives, not having to come into contact with others or risk their lives. Whew. We're on Cosmog. Cosmog, its body is gaseous and frail. It slowly grows as it collects dust from the atmosphere. That is an inorganic heterotroph if I've ever seen one. Cosmoem absorbs starlight to fuel it. That makes it an autotroph. And Solgaleo was once known as the beast that devours the sun. Energy in the form of light radiates boundlessly from it. I'm going to say it doesn't eat, and it doesn't actually eat the sun at any point. Meanwhile, Lunala steals the light from its surroundings and then becomes the full moon, showering its own light across the night sky. That is an autotroph. We made it to the Ultra Beast, Ultra Beast, Ultra Beast. I'm almost done with this research. Oh my gosh, I still got to edit it. Oh no. Oh no. Nihilego. It appeared in this world from an ultra wormhole. Nihilego appears to be a parasite that lives by feeding on people and Pokemon. That is a carnivore, baby. Meanwhile, Buzzwole goes around showing off its abnormally swollen muscles. It is one-of-a-kind ultra beast. Carnivore, considering its origins, and that it's a mosquito, and then it just insanguinates. Pheromosa, which is one of the ultra beasts, refuses to touch anything, perhaps because it senses some uncleanliness in this world. It is likely an herbivore. It could be an omnivore in its own world. Meanwhile, Xurkitree is an inorganic heterotroph that energizes itself with electricity. Celesteela doesn't state any diet data. When you look at information, though, it is very bamboo-like, as per other entries and information not in the Pokedex, so it's likely an autotroph. Kartana is made of paper. It has no diet data. If it gets wet, it weakens, so it probably just dies, even though it's a steel type. Guzzlord just eats anything and doesn't poop, so we don't know what happens to its droppings, but at least we know it's a or omnivore. Necrozma. Now, this is going to cover Dawn Wings and whatever, and Ultra Necrozma. This covers all of them. So if you ask me about, well, what about Ultra Necrozma and Dawn Wings, or Dawn Wings, Solgaleo, Dawn Wings, Lunala, they're the same Pokemon. They're effectively the same Pokemon. So, Necrozma looks somehow pained as it rages around in search of light, which serves as its energy. And it doesn't stop until it becomes Ultra Necrozma, which then tries to absorb the sun. That's its ultimate goal. Magearna, I'm going to say, doesn't eat. This is its form from almost 500 years ago, which is like the red, unfaded form. its body is nothing more than a container. Its artificial heart is the actual life form. Marshadow just lurks in the shadows of others, learning their abilities and then honing it to a new level. It doesn't eat. It's also a ghost. Then a couple more Ultra Beasts came out, like Poipole and Agonadel. They're very Beedrill-like, so I'm gonna say they're potentially an herbivore or omnivore. Stakataka is made up of many life forms stacked on top of one another. Now, it likely doesn't eat. It does take people and Pokemon and will, like, put it inside of its body and crush them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it eats them. But I'd allow an argument there. Blacephalon's kind of crazy because it takes advantage of opponents' surprise to rob them of their vitality. So it's an inorganic heterotroph that steals souls? Question mark. Zorora is potentially an omnivore. It does absorb electricity, but it can't really do anything with, like, it just does electromagnetic fields that it controls. It doesn't have an electric organ. It just kind of, like, lets it all hang around it. And it does have electrified claws that tears opponents apart. So, you know, even if you dodge, it does say that you'll be electrocuted by flying sparks. Very effective, and it is a cat. It's got to be a predator. Meltan is an inorganic heterotroph that just absorbs iron or other metals in order to become Melmetal, which doesn't seem to eat at all, as eventually it rusts, falls apart, and becomes Meltan again. Zacian and Zamazenta have very similar entries, talking about absorbing metal particles that it then transforms into the weapon it uses in battle. So, that doesn't really mean that it's eating it. They are dogs, so they could be omnivores, or other than being inorganic heterotrophs, they did sleep for a long time becoming stone statues, so they could be autotrophs potentially. They are one of the most confusing ones between all their, like, energy-consuming abilities. I'm recording this like 5-6 days later after I've recorded the rest of that, and I've been doing almost nothing but editing for the last couple of days. If you're in the Discord, you know it. But I realized I missed Eternamax/Eternatus, and really nice and easy, at least, with Eternamax and Eternatus, they create their own energy. They don't eat / are autotrophs because they produce the energy needed through creating Galar particles that fuel them and fuel Galar. Back to the past me. Go past me, who's also insane. Zarude is based off of baboons, and Zarude is known to be incredibly aggressive, and Pokemon of the forest fear it. So between its entry and baboon information, it's an omnivore. Regieleki and Regidrago, they don't eat. It is made of electricity. The other one's made of draconic energy. They don't need to consume energy at all. They need to become more. Regieleki needs to become unbound by its tethers, and Regidrago just doesn't have a complete body. Glacier just takes anything it wants by force. It is a horse, so it's either an herbivore or it could be an omnivore, if it really wants to be. Meanwhile, Spectrier absorbs the life force of sleeping creatures, craving silence and solitude, making it an inorganic heterotroph. Calyrex is a very merciful Pokemon, providing healing and blessing to others. It was the great king of Galar many years ago, and can cause hearts to mend and plants to spring forth. That's an herbivore mindset, and is an incredibly intelligent Pokemon. We've seen a lot of intelligent Pokemon being types that don't really eat other Pokemon, especially more so if they are emotionally connected to others. Kupfu and Urshifu are likely herbivores. They're very strong fighting type Pokemon. They are based off of bears. And Emrys might dole out wrathful, ruthless punishment, but I doubt it eats because of the same reasons we've talked about with the other genies. They are genies. They are pieces of nature, and this one presents like love in some capacity. We're in the paradoxes. We made it to paradoxes. Oh my gosh. Great Tusk is based on a Donphan. It just has bigger horns, so it's an herbivore. Screamtail, though, based on Jigglypuff, it has its sharp fangs, possibly a carnivore or an omnivore. It would make sense as to why Jigglypuff would get so upset when things don't fall asleep, because it's risking its life. It's a natural, like, thing or method inside of its body to ensure that it could have a meal for the day, and why it wouldn't stop until things would fall asleep. Brute Bonnet, based on a Moongus, absolutely a carnivore. Look at those teeth, let alone what a Moongus can do. Fluttermane, based on Mischievous, is either an inorganic heterotroph or doesn't eat. Slitherwing, based on Volcarona, likely an herbivore and an omnivore. Sandy Shocks, based on Magaton, definitely an inorganic heterotroph. And then I'm gonna blast through all of the iron Pokemon, all the future Paradox ones: Iron Treads, Iron Bundle, Iron Hands, Iron Moth, Iron Thorns, and Iron Valiant. They're all robots or cyborgs. They turn off. Their lights turn off, and they seem to just have infinite energy. The only one that makes me question is Iron Jugulis, which is based off of Hydreigon. And the Dex entry says one thing different from the rest of them. It says it resembles a certain Pokemon introduced in a paranormal magazine, described as the offspring of a Hydreigon that fell in love with a robot. Moving on. Wo-Chen drains the life force from vegetation. It's technically an herbivore. Shen Pao is based off of a snow leopard, carnivore. Ting Lu, the fear poured into an ancient ritual vessel, has clad itself in rocks and dirt to become a Pokemon. So, inorganic heterotroph that eats fear, maybe. Chi Yu controls burning flames that are 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, swimming through seas of lava, melting rock and sand. And the envy accumulated within the curved beats that sparked multiple conflicts has clad itself in fire and become a Pokemon, so doesn't eat, I assume. Koraidon and Miraidon are the apex predators of their time. I know specifically Koraidon states that it's the apex predator, but you can assume Miraidon's the same thing. Miraidon may not actually eat, or both of them are omnivores, but in the games, we've seen Miraidon eat the sandwiches, so do that with as you will, and they both resemble Cyclizar, being their paradox forms of it. And now we get into the DLC and the final Pokemon of this. Walking Wake is an aquatic monster mentioned in an old expedition journal. I'm gonna say it's a carnivore. I mean, look at it, sharp teeth and all. Iron Leaves doesn't eat as it turns off, or it's an autotroph, just as with any of the other iron ones. Gouging Fire is based off of Entei, so it's likely a carnivore and omnivore, and then Raging Bolts, we can say the same, as it's also based off of Raikou. Then, I've already said it before, but then you have Iron Boulder and Iron Crown, which both of them are robots. Sleep Energy! Okidogi is a dog, omnivore. Munkidori is an herbivore because monkey. And Pheasantipiti is an omnivore because it also has the sharp beak, and it actually does say Pheasantipiti beats its glossy wings to scatter pheromones that captivate people and Pokemon, so it might eat us also. Then you have Ogerpon. You can't tell me that Sweet Face is anything but an herbivore. It enjoys sweet fruits. It's too cute. It's like my top 3 favorite Pokemon. It literally goes Gengar, Walking Wake / Suicune, and Ogerpon. Not even in that order. Gengar is my number 1, but man, I love the other 3 so much. We have Terapagos, which protects itself using its power to transform energy into hard crystals. This Pokemon is the source of the Terrestrial phenomenon, which makes it an inorganic heterotroph, maybe mixed with an autotroph. And the last Pokemon, all 1,025, Pecharunt. It feeds others toxic mochi that draw out desires and capabilities. Those who eat the mochi fall under Pecharunt's control, changed to its will. I'm going to argue that it's an omnivore. Worst case scenario, then, if you don't want to argue that, then it's probably an autotroph, maybe an herbivore. It did sleep for a long time, and it is based off of like peach pits. So this concludes the entire video on the entire Pokemon food chain. If you made it to this point and you watched the whole thing or listened to the whole thing, please like this, share this with people. This took so much work. You could become a member of the channel. You can join the Discord. I want to do more things like this. I have so many questions that I want answered for Pokemon, and you have so many questions that you would like answered for Pokemon, so comment them below. I have a list that I'm kind of pick and choosing from as per my leisure and what I really want to do. Once it gets to a certain point and I'm able to live off of the channel, I would love to just make this a weekly thing. Obviously, I can't, like, I think I spent, how much time did I spend? I mean, you can see how much time I spent just on the video itself. So please, support the channel in any way you can. It is greatly appreciated. Watch the other long-form content that I've done. Go watch the Nuzlockes. Go watch my other videos that are maybe shorter than this one, because those help support videos like this. I really mean it. Don't even bother with the shorts. I'm not even gonna lie. I get 17 cents for every 1,000 views on a short. That's whatever. That gains subscribers. But I want to build a community. I want to have a good basis, and I want to be able to make a living off of this, so that way I can continue to provide quality content and not work 24 hours a day between my actual job and YouTube, and instead just focus on YouTube, working a proper couple of shifts a week. There are streams. Come say hi on the streams. If you made it to this point, I will say one more thing. I am doing a charity stream on August 10th where I'm going to be playing Elden Ring and your donations give you coins that you can then use to mess with my game as I play. You could literally just wipe me off the face of the planet, or even summon pretty much any of the bosses, not including the DLC that comes out like tomorrow. I'm recording this the day before the DLC comes out, and it's for the kids. Be there for it. I would appreciate that immensely, and it helps save lives. It's a great thing, and honestly, I wouldn't be here without the children's hospitals from when I was younger. So, with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other, and I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!